Hey, Jasmine.
Hey, I'm gonna close my door really quick.
Yeah. I'm going to leave you as host because Zoom is telling me that it might disrupt things if I try to take it back from you.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Are you like co-host or like
Yeah.
alternative host? Okay, see
Yeah.
how.
It says I'm a co-host.
Okay. Were you able to do the polls?
Yes.
I guess if you have the ability to launch them, then
Do you see them if you click more? Does it come up?
yeah, I can see them.
But you can't launch them.
Oh, I can launch them too.
Oh.
Okay, I think we're set.
Okay.
Stop sharing and just move all my stuff to the screen I'm not sharing. Okay, looks like these rotating slides are working.
I think so.
Yep. After this one, it should loop back to the first. Cool. I think we're all set. I have both slides like pulled up.
Cool.
You can
Yeah.
just cue me verbally for what to pull up.
I hope it'll be obvious. Yeah. David, I've got a question for you.
Yeah,
This is being recorded, and so my question is, do we want to publish this on the website or do we want to like put it with like a secret link where people can only get it if they ask?
good question. I think the latter,
Okay.
because I don't think we want to publish it.
Okay.
For those of you just joining, we'll be starting in just about a minute after. Just give folks 1 minute more to join.
Say again, I'm sorry. Okay, so
Hi, everybody. We are 1 minute past the hour, so I'm going to get started with logistics before we get into our main agenda. First, thank you for being here. In case we haven't met before, I need to introduce myself. My name is Maddie Kohler. I work here at NASEO, and I am the NASEO person who's working on all these rebate programs. So thanks to everybody who's been engaging with us over more than the last year. Appreciate everybody getting into the weeds on all of these topics. My quick logistic items is that when you joined in, you probably noticed that we are recording this meeting. We're not planning on publishing this on the NASEO website, but we will have it available for folks that aren't able to make it today so that they can reference it later. And please, throughout the day, this afternoon and tomorrow, use the Zoom chat to chime in with any thoughts. And during the question and answer portion of each of these sessions, you of course can use the raise your hand feature, in either I or a moderator for the session will turn to you and ask you to chime in with whatever you might want to share. And so let me just we'll do a quick overview of the agenda for this afternoon, and then I'll turn things over to David to get started. So today we are focused on program access for people with low incomes. And we've got some great sessions lined up with state speakers who can cover how they're thinking about these topics. The first one we'll be discussing is the weatherization model and what we can learn from that, applying it to the HOMES rebate program. And then coming up after that, we'll do covering project costs, the entirety of project costs using the HOMES rebate program. After that, we are doing the risks of utility bill increases with electrification projects. And then we will wrap things up with income verification. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the afternoon enough that you'll want to join us tomorrow for market transformation. And so I think that's all of the intro that I wanted to make sure I give. So I'll turn things over to David for opening remarks.
Thanks, Maddie. Appreciate it. And thanks to Maddie and Jasmine for making today's workshop run well, and to the rebates and residential team, Sandy and Grace and others on staff that have made this possible. Appreciate you taking time today as well. When Maddie and I conceived of this a virtual workshop today and tomorrow, we had many topics we could have chosen from. And I think the ones we chose were largely informed by the various regional conversations we have each month and multiple times a month around rebates. But we wanted to focus it on the application process because most of you are somewhere in that, either thinking about it, preparing to do the application, or actually working on the application. And so that's why we focused here in the topics that Maddie just went through that'll be on the agenda. I think hopefully you'll find this virtual format useful. There never seems to be enough hours in the day to discuss the rebate topics, but also hours in the day to make it from A to B. So we hope this is helpful. Please give us feedback over the next couple of days, this afternoon, tomorrow afternoon. It is our intent to do some additional sessions like this in the coming couple of months in between our in-person regional meetings. And we're thinking about, for example, the next one being around understanding measured energy savings, both generally as the concept, but also specifically how it fits within the statute and with the additional requirements that DOE has been having. Also, just a thank you to, I know Karen will be coming up next from DOE, but thank you to our DOE colleagues for the work that they have been doing. Karen, Joan, Adam, many others on the team that have been working, trying to answer questions, trying to make the process move forward as quickly as possible. The discussions we have today will certainly pick up on the other calls and the regional calls and the in-region meetings, but really, again, encourage you to help us prioritize how we do this. There are too many topics to choose from, not surprisingly, but we tried to narrow that down. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Will Tour, the director of the Colorado Energy Office and also NASEO Executive Committee member, to introduce our first session. Thank you, Will.
Thank you very much, David, and great to be able to join this conversation today. Before turning it over to Karen, I just wanted to give a couple of minutes of perspective on how one state, Colorado, has been grappling with some of these questions. And for context, we are part of the current DOE Sprint cohort, and so we're trying to move relatively quickly towards program application. We are hoping to get our HEEHR application in by the end of this week. HOMES will take a little bit longer. But the way that we've been thinking about a number of the issues around low-income access have really sort of shaped how we're structuring both of those applications. On the home side, we ended up making the decision to primarily focus on multifamily affordable housing. And as we looked at some of the complexity involved with the HOMES program, whether it was either modeled or measured savings, our sense was that it would be easier for some of the more sophisticated multifamily operators to be able to comply with that. And we know that we have a real issue in Colorado with energy use in multifamily affordable housing. It's particularly relevant for us because our state has adopted a building performance standard program that requires buildings over 50,000 square feet to meet certain energy reduction targets. And we wanted to make it as easy as possible for affordable housing to be able to comply with that. So we will also be working with our weatherization program. So folks who are eligible for weatherization will be able to access the rebates, as well as we will be doing a separate program focused on residents in manufactured housing. But by and large, the focus will be that multifamily residential. On the electrification side, we share some of the concerns that are out there about the potential for utility bill increases if we don't manage it very carefully. In Colorado, most customers are natural gas customers, but there are a variety of folks who are on propane or wood heating or electric heating, where there likely would be significant bill savings. But because of the fact that so many customers are on natural gas, we have had some concern that if we focus the electrification rebates only on the lowest cohort of income, focusing on 80% or lower AMI, that we could see some challenges. So for the electrification rebates, we are planning on making them eligible up to 150% AMI, and are anticipating that we will likely see, more significant uptake in that middle range than among our lowest income residents. So that's how we've been trying to grapple with some of these questions. But with that, I would like to turn it over to Karen Zelmar from the Department of Energy.
Hi, yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm turning on my video now. Hello, everyone. I'm sure I've met many of you, but in case you don't know me, Karen Zalmar, I am the program manager for Home Energy Rebates. I am actually here in Washington, D.C. For some meetings with my SCEP family cohorts, because we know that a lot of you guys are thinking about all our programs together. And so we want to make sure we're thinking about that for you as well. So I'm here in a small cubicle in the Forrestal building in Washington, D.C. So first of all, thank you, Will, for kicking this off. And really thanks to your team for being such great participants in our sprint cohort. I also really want to thank NASEO. You guys have just been wonderful partners, and really appreciate you including us in this session. We have planned some topics for you based on some suggestions that we got from the NASEO team. Oh, I'm wondering how I'm sharing twice, but I know how I am. My colleague and a relatively new member of my team, who some of you may not have yet met, Charles Newborn, is my lead for technical assistance and stakeholder engagement. And he has been with us since I think since December. Charles, you can correct me, mid-December. And that we has been a wonderful addition to our team based on his background and experience. Hopefully he'll take a second to introduce himself. And he's going to be walking you through a few things. He's going to talk about the resources that we have out there and available that we've been developing for all of you. We know a lot of you are leveraging them heavily, but we also know that some of you, unsurprisingly, aren't reading every email we send with bated breath and maybe don't know some of the resources that we have available. So we want to make sure you know what's out there. And we also want to share what's coming, both some written services and resources, but also what's coming as our Sprint 2 cohort comes to an end, and what's going to happen next, because we want to offer similar services to many, many more of you that we've offered to our first 2 Sprint cohort groups. So that's teeing up for Charles. I'm going to hand it over to him. I know it says that he's Karen Zalmar because he had trouble with his link, so I shared my Zoom link with him, but actually that is Charles Newborn, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Charles. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I echo Karen's sentiment. It's really great to be with you. Thank you to NASEO. Thank you to all of the states for all of your great work. So sharing my screen now, just want to talk through, as Karen noted, some resources that you've likely had some exposure to. Before I dive in, I'll just share a bit about my background. So as Karen also mentioned, coming to DOE roughly 3 months ago from the kind of private sector space, primarily working with implementation contractors, leading programs across the Southeast, Midwest, Northeast. Hadn't made it quite far west, but a number of different program models in my background, from everything single family, multifamily, commercial, small business. I also spent a brief time with the Minnesota Department of Commerce directing their Weatherization Assistance Department. And so have a kind of fairly well-rounded sense of some of the challenges that are baked into this endeavor. So I often kind of switch, figuratively between hats, thinking about my time in the implementation space, thinking about my time in state government, and now thinking about ways that we as DOE can create an environment for success that allows us to accomplish big things with these programs. So a lot of the work that we'll talk about in terms of resources, as well as kind of our plan to support states, kind of bundles all of that, influence, especially as we've got a really diverse team with backgrounds in similar spaces, as well as kind of different spaces to kind of apply that same thinking. So I'll dive into some resources now, again, that you've likely got some exposure to already. I'll highlight a couple from each of these buckets. The RFP endeavor is going to be new for some states, commonplace for others, but working with implementers might be something that in terms of delivering a statewide program, you may benefit from some guidance. So we've got guidance for RFPs for both 50121 and 50122. definitely worth reviewing that and just highlight some things to keep in mind as you're engaging with, if you're engaging with implementers, just highlights a few things to be mindful of in that process. For the implementation blueprints, I'd say these resources are likely long awaited for a number of you that have kind of really gotten into the planning process. We have some things that are already out. The community benefits plan required elements. Think about required elements as almost a checklist, almost a kind of expanded breakdown of what we include in our requirements so that it's pulled out, itemized, and you've got kind of a clear list or checklist of things to build into your implementation blueprint plans. For data access, we have kind of an introduction document as well as some pathways and background that's really useful, and a guide for data and tools that can also help as you're thinking about really structuring kind of your program and implementing. Additionally, the education and outreach plan is all of these things have already been released. The education and outreach required elements, so similar to the community benefits plan required elements, gives you that checklist, allows you to use that to structure your plan documents as you're getting those ready for submission. In the program design bucket, a few that I'll highlight, integrating with WAP is a great resource. I know a number of states are thinking about ways to kind of navigate that. And this gives some high-level thoughts. We will continue to develop resources, particularly in that category, because again, we know that there's some complexity to it, and we want to make sure that states have guidance and they can have our perspective as well on best approaches there. In terms of program implementation, I think these will be really tangible tools that states can use. The budget allocation calculator, I think we're on either V2 or V3, is a refined tool to help with, a pretty challenging item as far as your application. Just gives you, a tool to do some of the work for you as you're planning and thinking about how to structure those budgets and set targets. The other one that I'll highlight at this time, consumer protection best practices, another kind of tool, things to think about as you're building out both plans, but really thinking about implementing these programs. So feel free to visit our energy.gov/SCEP site. You'll see these resources listed there. Again, as these new resources are added to this list, we'll be sending out notices to those of you who have already subscribed to kind of our listserv. I'll move on to some resources that are under development. Again, I'll just highlight a few or a couple from each of these buckets. Income verification is another one of those tricky areas with the home energy rebates program. So we want to provide some initial guidance and continue to think about ways that we can structure resources that answer some of the recurring or burning questions that states are wrestling with in their planning process. So this resource is tracking well for a release within, let's say, the next 30 days. So you'll see that coming soon, and it will be followed with some additional resources that can help structure or help you, the state, structure kind of your approach to verifying income and all that's associated with it. In terms of implementation blueprints, I mentioned that we've got some required elements out. We've got a number that are in the queue. We're also looking at sample blueprint plan responses. Similar to kind of our sample application responses, the sample blueprint plan responses are meant to be a starting point for states to build on, to kind of get some ideas rolling, and as much as anything to help give more clarity to DOE's expectation in regard to these deliverables. So these resources are also kind of in the queue and in motion substantially. Should expect something, I'd say, before the end of April for almost all of these items here, which again includes required elements and sample responses for the implementation blueprint items. Last but not least, program implementation. Again, thinking about resources that states can use as tools. This will be a lot of guidance, clarification, and in some cases, things to think about above and beyond kind of what's prescribed in guidance. The weatherization readiness, again, we know that states are interested in leveraging these programs in conjunction with weatherization. So you'll see this resource coming soon, and it will be followed by others, especially as we have more conversations with states and learn more about specifically where the open questions or more complex issues might require additional resources. Finally, the other one I'll highlight, mitigating risk of utility bill increase. Again, another complex item that we want to be or provide support for. So would highlight that there is some analysis work that NREL is doing and working closely with states, in some cases one-on-one, to kind of model out the potential risk based on scenarios that are in line with the state's initial kind of program design. So the support that would be offered here is potentially, some standing guidance, but also just making sure that states are aware that NREL is a resource that you can tap into to do some direct analysis about kind of the scenarios that you're mulling over or considering for your program's design. I'll move on to another set of resources. This lovely team that you see in front of you here, our technical assistance team, are certainly meant to be resources for states to navigate this, sometimes, again, complex and challenging process of applying and developing plans. We are joined by some of this team today. Adam Haas is a member of our team, been with DOE for quite a while, and has expertise in a number of areas, including Justice 40 implementation. I'd say WAP integration is another specialty area. Lisa Serrano, our tribal rebates expert, also has a great deal of federal experience working with tribes. And we know, again, that that's a area that states are also considering. How can they supplement, complement, or just align with tribes in the kind of tribal program, thinking about the state, working together to combine efforts there to the extent possible. Mia Lombardi, our electrification expert, is I believe with us today as well. She offers a ton of great experience in implementation, working with both implementation contractors and utility companies. Lauren Ross, our multifamily expert, wealth of knowledge in the affordable housing space, and using that to help inform state program design for multifamily components. And last but certainly not least, Joan Glickman, expert in many things, including market transformation. So this team, again, will be at your disposal in many ways. Want to talk about how we have provided support and how we will continue to provide support that a lot of states have shared with us has been most beneficial, having that kind of direct support, that focused attention of a team that can ideally remove barriers or at least minimize speed bumps in real time. So thinking about kind of that resource group, both the tangible resources and the people resources, how those can be leveraged. As a lot of you are aware, we have gone through a number of what we called sprint cohorts toward the end of last year, beginning of this year. So that direct support was provided, and we work with states to set targets for submitting applications, all in a path toward getting funds obligated. A similar approach will be carried forward. So, we used the lessons learned from Sprint 1 and Sprint 2 and tried to take forward the best pieces. Again, the feedback that we received from both cohort groups is that direct support has been useful. So again, I want to carry that forward. What will that look like in the very near future? It will look very similar. We are planning to work with states in a similar way. So kind of a grouping structure as opposed to a sprint structure. I want to give states space to communicate kind of their timeline and provide focused support based on when they will need it most. So we're looking for states to kind of opt in, to share kind of where they're wanting to land and when, and make support available based on their timelines. So as we kind of outline here, we'll are planning tentatively to have a few more groups throughout the rest of this year, a group 3, a group 4, and a group 5, with kind of launching more or less a new group every couple of months. And again, that will allow us to take our kind of team resources, our people resources, and pair them with states to offer that direct support that's been framed as really beneficial from states that have participated up to this point. A little more detail on what that will look like. So talking specifically about group 3, and we'll hear from the states about their timeline, and we will kind of establish some milestones associated with each group. Those milestones will include target delivery date for your application and kind of the target launch date for your programs. The groups will be kind of broken down into subgroups based on commonalities or themes. That's another bit of feedback that we've gathered from the early sprint cohorts, namely that a lot of the learning, a good portion of it, comes from hearing from peers. So we want to kind of, again, carry that positive outcome of the first couple of sprint cohorts forward into our group work, where we're allowing states to work with states that are in similar situations, that have similar, environments or kind of goals in terms of their program. So we'll start with, the big group that's just defined by the timelines. We'll kind of pare that down to subgroups that are defined by commonalities, and do that all in service of facilitating peer exchanges that are beneficial for the group to the maximum extent possible. In terms of other components of the grouping format, and this is certainly going to be the case for group 3, and likely will carry this structure forward for the upcoming groups as well, we'll offer to states at the subgroup level potentially a couple of meetings a week. So you'd be, again, working with states that are in similar situations or have similar timelines and kind of programmatic challenges or considerations. We'd have a topical office hour that would be available to the sprint cohort, where we're taking some of the conversation or questions from those subgroup meetings into kind of a larger forum. So we can, again, facilitate shared learnings across state lines for the groups that are participating. There may be the need for some more specific conversations, say, with our general counsel or our contracting officer. So we want to make at least a meeting or two available for states with those very specific resources, so that, again, we can hopefully remove barriers or minimize speed bumps in real time or as close as possible. So that's high level kind of the structure of group 3, and will likely be the structure of group 4 and 5. Again, the type of support is going to come in a focused set of resources that will workshop the state's either plans or applications, or both, in real time, and be available to help clarify guidance as close to real time as possible. Leveraging the group that we talked about earlier will also come into kind of or be based on some of the subject matter expertise or subject matter content that's discussed. So we'll pull in the right subject matter experts and either fold them into the weekly meetings, or kind of have some topical office hours where they will lead a session to discuss, some of the items that come up in the group work. Just to kind of see how all of this comes together, again, group work is expected to last about a month. The target would be for states that opt into that group work to deliver their application within 30 days of the end of that group work. And we'd be looking at kind of a 60 to 90 day review process for applications, as far as kind of this chunk, depending on when states submit. There's also, some considerations about the back and forth that's required, but our target internally is to have kind of 60 working days in review of the topic or in review of the application, excuse me, with the target of course, awarding the funds at the end of that period. There is an option, of course, as many of you know, to submit blueprints in a kind of deferred way. So application narrative responses can come in first, blueprint or implementation plans can come in next. So we would be looking for that to flow in alignment with the goal of having a program ready to launch within 120 days of that group work. The blueprints themselves are required within 60 days or at least 60 days before your launch target. We would be reviewing plans that are submitted in a deferred way during that time period, and again, supporting states toward a program launch within that 120 days. So that is the proposed structure. We will be reaching out in the very near future to provide the feedback and to obtain feedback on kind of the ideal grouping structure. We are planning to connect with states and make the groups available based on the timelines that were outlined. Again, we're looking to have groups every 2 months. So expect communication from either your project officer, or we'll reach out to a larger group, or via one of the distribution emails to get your feedback on which group you might be interested in participating in. Again, this group work has been found to be impactful, and that's the feedback that we're carrying forward about the structure that states have found that direct support has been quite useful. With that, again, want to say thank you for all of your efforts thus far, and pass it back to Karen for some closeout thoughts.
All right. So we've been very excited to share with you what's coming. And we're just about ready to hand you over to the remaining programming for NASEO's event. I have one last question that I'm just going to throw out to all of you. Don't need to discuss it right now, but I just want to plant a seed. As I mentioned, I'm here in DC. I'm usually based in California, trying to work with the other programs here about how we can be more efficient and, make sure the sum is greater than the whole of its parts, or whatever that phrase is. And I was meeting with the other program teams that work directly with you guys, the SEP team or the workforce training team. And we were trying to figure out how can we be more efficient with all of you. How can we, we all meet with you separately. How can we be more efficient together? So I just want to throw out that if any of you have ideas about how we can make sure that all the SCEP teams who work with you, the state energy offices, can be more efficient, we'd love to hear your ideas. So, send it over, let us know. And with that, I don't know, Maddie, if you wanted to allow time for questions on what we said, or just jump right into your programming. We're here for whatever you want.
Thanks. Yeah. Let's see if we have a question from someone in the crowd at State Energy Office. And I see I've got questions in the chat asking to be able to take a look at your slides, which I'm happy to distribute. And it sounds like they will also be available from project officers. Any questions for DOE? We got one in the chat. And there's a question from Oregon asking if there's an option for states to join the Blueprint Technical Assistance Group if they've already developed their initial applications.
I like the idea of it. Charles, we haven't talked about that. Charles, are you still there? Maybe he's having sound problems.
I am sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's certainly a good thing to think through. We may need to put our heads together internally and figure out a way to accommodate that. But it makes a lot of sense that there be interest and support there. I think that's something that we can definitely consider.
Great. Thanks. We'll move on to our next session, but thank you, GUE folks, for making the time to be here this afternoon. You're welcome to stay and listen for as much as you like. I'm sure that everyone on the line knows how to get a hold of you guys, but I'm also happy to facilitate that as well if anyone wants to reach out to me.
Maddie, just one quick thing. I saw one last
Yes.
question that says, does joining a sprint group speed up the application review process? What I would say is we're reviewing applications as we receive them. So if joining a sprint group helps you move along faster, then yes. You know, we're managing the queue as it comes in. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to turn things over to our next panel. I'll invite Emily to come on screen. There she is, and introduce our next topic about the weatherization model and what we can learn from it for the HOMES program. Emily, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Maddie. Can you hear me okay? I always wonder if my microphone is working properly.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Emily Wilburn, and I am with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's virtual session on the IRA Home Energy Rebate Program, as Maddie had said. So in this session, we have a couple of speakers from Vermont with us to talk about the intersection of the Home Energy Rebate Program and the longstanding federal Weatherization Assistance Program. So I know that every state is a little different in how they are structured and where the programs live. But in Missouri, our state energy office and our weatherization program live in the same division in the Department of Natural Resources. So our programs are able to interact pretty often with each other when there's overlapping funds or overlapping ideas. So we're very fortunate in that sense. So currently we are, like many of you, I'm sure, working on developing an application and program design for standing up our home rebate program for our state, which is, you know, why this session in particular is of particular interest to me. And so, you know, a lot of our time is being taken up with that, along with all the other federal funding that's coming our way. But when the idea of the home energy rebate program came out, my first thought, I have to admit, was about what the impact would be to our weatherization program, mainly in the sense of, will we be losing a lot of energy auditors to industry, where there's going to be a greater need for energy auditors because of the home energy rebate program? And I had thought about, you know, what that's going to look like as far as the weatherization program goes, and how it's going to affect both sides of the programs that we run here. And I'd also heard about stacking funds to maximize impacts, but I was mainly keeping the programs very separate in my mind, and I hadn't actually made the connection of going in the other direction on how to use the weatherization program with the rebate program. And so I'm really excited about being part of today's discussion, to hear from our speakers today and others about their thoughts and plans for the home energy rebate and their weatherization programs. So we have two speakers with us for you today. They are both from the Vermont Department of Public Service. Thank you guys for joining us. Melissa Bailey is the Director of the Division of Efficiency and Energy Resources, and Ian Lund is an energy program specialist. Thank you, Melissa and Ian, for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you to start the conversation.
Thanks, Emily. So I'm going to start off the little presentation that we put together just by going through basically an overview of our program, and Melissa will chime in as necessary, and then we'll both stick around to answer some questions. So just to get right into it. Yeah, so we are receiving $58 million for the Home Energy Reborns program, 29 million for HOMES and HEEHR respectively. And our plan is to give 100% of the HOMES funding to our Weatherization Assistance Program. Some little context about Vermont is that we have one of the oldest housing stocks in the country, and therefore we have a ton of work to do weatherization wise. We also have a very high percentage of unregulated fuels heating this old housing stock, which makes electrification and efficiency all the more important. So we have a goal of accelerating weatherization in the state with trying to achieve 120,000 homes by 2030. And while we are making progress towards that, progress has been sort of lagging due to inadequate funding. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. I just want to go over sort of the basic structure of a Weatherization Assistance Program. It's administered by our Office of Economic Opportunity, which is housed in our Department of Children and Families. Melissa and I are in the State Energy Office, which is housed within our Public Service Department. So it's not quite as easy as it seems like it is for Emily, but they've been extremely forthcoming and helpful to work with. So the Weatherization Assistance Program is comprised of 5 geographically dispersed community action agencies and 3E Thermal, which is a contractor serving the multifamily sector in Vermont that's defined as 5+ units. So we have the community action agencies that serve single family housing and 2 to 4 unit multifamily buildings. The WAP program serves the vast majority, I would say, of all the weatherization projects that take place in the state that are made possible in some part by public funding. They install about 120, or they complete about 1,200 homes a year. This year, they're projected to do more than that and spend about $18,500,000 in WAP funds, with a projected increase of about 10% in spending in projects year over year. What makes this, I think, even more possible than maybe for some other states is that Vermont's Weatherization Assistance Program is funded mostly with state funding. It's $10 million a year from gross receipts tax on fuel. And then secondarily, the consistent funding we get is from federal funding, which is $1.6 million a year. So about like 1/10 of what we get in state funding is federal funding from the National WAP program. And then in recent years, through the bipartisan infrastructure law and ARPA, we've infused $3.6 million a year from bipartisan infrastructure law, and that expires in 2028. And then we infused $45 million from ARPA in 2021, just for in-state weatherization, and that runs out in 2026. I don't think all of that went to the weatherization program, but a decent chunk of it did. And this expansion in funding, it allowed our OEO to expand their staff and services. They were able to offer heat pumps and heat pump water heaters as part of weatherization projects. And what we see this HOMES funding helping us to do is basically sustain these expanded services and stave off a funding cliff for WAP, which would happen when these ARPA and bill funds run out. So hopefully we can keep what we're doing going until 2031. Another reason that we found some synchronicity with the WAP is that there's just a lot of similarities between the requirements of the HOMES program and our existing weatherization program. They already do income verification, and how it works for Vermont is we offer no cost weatherization services. So we cover 100% of the cost of the project for households whose gross income is below 80% AMI, which comports with the sort of low income group or sector served by HOMES. A family of 4 with an annual income of about $72,000 would be eligible in most Vermont communities. The WAP program currently delivers about 29.7 average energy savings per project, with a lot of projects actually going far above that, and which would exceed the 35% modeled savings threshold for the HOMES program. This equates to about a little more than $1,000 annual energy savings for customers heating with oil, as many customers in Vermont do. The average cost of a full weatherization project has been increasing. In 2021, it was about $8,000, a little more than $8,000, but that cost has slowly been creeping up. In 2022, the average cost was about $10,000 per project, and now we're hearing the average cost of a project is coming in around $15,000, though this might reflect the infusion of the ARPA and bipartisan infrastructure funds. So that sort of brings us to one of the challenges, or things that we're going to have to wrestle with as we sort of implement this program, which is our current weatherization program covers 100% of weatherization costs, and those costs are greater than the $8,000 max provided by, or that's stipulated in the DOE guidance. So we are probably going to propose to DOE that we cover 100% of project costs with the HOMES money, without an increase in energy savings, because though we do see some pretty good energy savings, I don't know how feasible it will be to consistently get above 35% for every single project. And then if that's not allowed, our backup plan is probably will be to close this 20% gap with state funding. What else? Yeah, I think that's all I really am prepared to talk about. Melissa, if there's anything you want to add, feel free.
Yeah, thanks Ian, for giving the overview and again, Director of the Energy Office. We're happy to take
Melissa,
questions.
you're echoing a little bit.
Sorry, folks, is that any better?
No.
I'm gonna drop and come back and let Ian take questions.
Okay, great. Thanks for listening, guys. Do you have any questions?
Well, that's some great information so far, and it's pretty interesting about the use of the unregulated fuels in most of your homes up there. You said that you expanded your programs from using ARPA and build funding. Do you anticipate like increasing compensation for workers because of the additional work, or how do you kind of see that playing out? Because I know the IRA, the rebate money, does allow for kind of training and that kind of stuff, but do you see additional workforce development as far as how you plan on implementing?
We haven't talked about doing that as part of our program. We definitely, when we submitted our track application, we were thinking about synchronicities between these two programs. But I think it's definitely something that's come up a lot, especially as workforce is one of the things that's driving up costs. But we do not anticipate at this time using a significant amount of these funds for training.
So it looks like there's a question in chat. Vermont likely has a lot of pre-weatherization barriers like other states in New England. How are you able to address those, and if so, how? That's from.
So are you talking about sort of the health and safety costs? That's something that's come up with our conversations in OEO is we spend maybe like $550 on average on vermiculite and like $700 per project on other sort of pre-weatherization activities. We have lightly talked to DOE about these things and whether or not we could include them as part of project costs, and I don't think we've gotten actually a clear answer from them on that yet. And if we can't spend HOMES funds on them, I think it'll be the same backup plan where we go back and use drawn state funding for that.
It looks like Melissa's joined us again. See if she's able
Sound check.
to.
I'm back. How is the audio?
Perfect, crystal clear.
Oh, great. Try again.
Melissa, do you want to take this question about 100% costs without energy saving considerations?
Sure. Yeah, I see another question in the chat. So yes, we're going to request to DOE, well, not entirely clear on the question. We're going to propose to DOE covering 100% of the cost for the income eligible households under 80% AMI. Given the existing energy savings requirements for the HOMES program. So homes that either exceed the 20% energy savings threshold or the 35% energy savings threshold, our proposal would be to cover 100% of the costs above the 8,000 cap. So full project cost. Let me know if that's responsive to the question.
Have you had discussions with DOE about this proposal, or have they given you any like insight or thoughts about?
We've had some preliminary conversations with, our DOE liaison and the DOE team on technical analysis, technical assistance, and essentially the guidance we got was go ahead and make your case for why these are very legitimate, reasonable costs for getting the weatherization work done in these homes. And DOE will evaluate the proposal. So we have not gotten the green light from DOE, but in my mind, we also haven't gotten a firm no.
Looks like we have another question in chat. Did I hear correctly that Vermont will be able to allocate the HEEHR funds into your existing WAP program? Wondering how this works, as guidance indicates we should braid stack, but can oh gosh, it jumped on me, sorry, can supplement but not supplant WAP or commingle funds with any other federal grant source, or is this the allocation just the state funded portion of WAP?
So yes, I think, yeah, in my mind, there's a lot of confusion around braiding versus stacking versus commingling of funds. So, right, we would not be using federal WAP dollars on the same house as HOMES dollars. We were looking at this as adding a new revenue source for our state weatherization assistance program, but there would be, my understanding is that the prohibition is on bringing federal WAP dollars and federal HOMES dollars to the same home or household or same project. So we started going down that path in our planning, and really, given that prohibition, we've come back to the weatherization providers, and they essentially would need to manage the two pots of money separately. So complete 100 weatherization jobs using DOE's WAP money, and then another section of homes using the HOMES or HEEHR money. And I hope that's clear, but understanding the prohibition on supplementing the two funding sources in the same home.
So a couple more questions in chat. One from Maddie. Would the customers know the difference in where the money is coming from?
Great question, and ideally no. It's the same eligible, this is the demographic we're really looking to serve is low income households, typically in older housing, rental properties in Vermont. Typically, we're looking to have the exact same service offering across the board with all of these funding sources that would be managed behind the scenes.
Okay, another question. Do you plan to apply for any of the training grants that are coming through the pipeline for energy auditing or contractor training?
Ian, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, we applied for the energy contractor training grants, and I don't think we're going to apply for the energy auditor training, just because when we've shopped the idea around to various stakeholders, it's not something that's come up. It seems like the training or the supply of energy auditors isn't actually so much the problem. It's the retention of them in our state.
And then another question in chat. Would there be a maximum amount you would allow, or is there no cap for the 100% project costs?
Yeah, I mean, being candid, you all are hearing our thinking in real time. We absolutely would propose a cap. I think DOE would require that. But Ian's floated this $15,000 number, and that's kind of in reality the project cost we're seeing. So we would certainly put in a cap, but it might be something like 16,000 per project, and recognize that's double the initial threshold. And we are fortunate to have state funds to potentially supplement if we get prohibited from going that high with the project cap. But essentially, we're really trying to not overburden our Weatherization Assistance Program administrator by having to bring different funds to the table. The administrative tracking of the funds, essentially, we're trying to minimize that burden for them.
So another question in chat, will WAP specify whether rebates are coming from WAP, or will you specify that the additional rebates is from the home energy rebates?
That's a great question, and one we honestly haven't given much thought to. My initial thinking was that this would just be branded as Vermont's Weatherization Assistance Program and an expansion of that. But if there was a need to attribute the funding to the home energy rebate program, I don't think we'd be averse to doing that.
So I'll tack on my questions and let folks online contemplate their questions added to the chat. But while I see all these questions come up, I've been thinking kind of along similar lines, and having both the weatherization program and our home rebates program kind of in the same area for us. One of the things that I often think about, and I don't know if this is even a concern for anybody else on the call, but what I often think about is the tracking, right? How do you, there's different systems, and the way we operate, we have different systems, different tracking systems for different reasons, right? And so if we would give money, the home rebate money, to the weatherization program, I'm not sure our system would be able to handle, our software system is, and that's what I mean, is the tracking mechanism. Is there, do you guys have you run into that, or do you know what tracking system your weatherization program uses and how they would be able to handle something, an injection of this foreign money?
So I don't know specifically what tracking system they use, but they seem fairly confident that they can do the tracking for these HOMES dollars uniquely. They currently have the infusion of state money, which again, as Ian mentioned, is 85 or 90% of their funding. They're separately tracking ARPA dollars that got allocated to the Weatherization Assistance Program and have their own unique set of requirements. And then also the additional funding that went to the weatherization agencies under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So they are already tracking all of those buckets uniquely, and they seem confident that they can separately track HOMES expenditures.
We may need to talk to their weatherization program.
Happy to connect you.
A couple of other questions coming in the chat. Do you work with nonprofit weatherization providers? If so, how will they handle performing for-profit work under the rebate program?
So our weatherization providers are nonprofit. I'm not sure I fully understand the profit work. Do you mean the contractor incentives? The question might be related to I think the contractor incentive for serving disadvantaged communities and low-income households.
If you want to
that
come
is it, or yeah,
you can, I think, to join the conversation, or I think.
Oh, who will get the rebate?
Who will get the rebate?
Yeah, our intention would be for the funding to flow through our Office of Economic Opportunity to the Weatherization Assistance Program providers, which are nonprofits, and essentially they would hold the funding, and the funds would never go to the customer, because project costs are 100% covered. So there's never payment from the customer.
Okay, another question in the chat. How is Vermont handling paying contractors for the pre and post energy assessment and any installer progress payments that might be required? In consideration, there should be no out of pocket from low income homeowners, and we cannot pay the rebate until post assessment and verification of installation. Alaska is doing modeled.
So we are also taking the modeled approach. I can't remember if Ian mentioned that. My understanding of how a weatherization model works is that this the Weatherization Assistance Program providers, that our community action agencies, essentially pay the contractors for the work. And so our understanding is that we would have this funding in hand, and OEO would pay those contractors on the schedule that they're already using when they do the pre-assessments. They'd pay the contractors for doing the install and do that verification on the back end, that these are the same as the requirements that they're imposing for their current weatherization work around the post-install modeling and energy savings verification.
So it sounds to me like, you know, as opposed to like a rebate program, right? This is the way the weatherization program works is, you know, the funding is assigned to our community action agencies who actually do the weatherization work. And then after they do the work, they're reimbursed for the money. So, you know, I'm assuming it's kind of similar in Vermont as well. So it's not the same as a rebate in the sense that it's not going it's not going anywhere else but to the agency that's doing the work. And after the work's done and approved and verified, then they receive the reimbursement for the work that was done.
That's our intent, and the concept we floated with DOE is it's essentially a point of work discount applied in that the homeowner never pays any of the costs for the work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very interested to see how DOE reacts to this. It does sound, I think that based on the questions that I'm seeing in the chat, it sounds like, you know, I think we kind of all have questions about how that would work. I will leave some space for folks online to enter additional questions. Looks like Tom says, oh, it jumped on me. 100% covered proposal for low income and pay the contractor directly, not the customer. Our thoughts as well. Look forward to DOE's response. Absolutely. Next comment. I worked on California state program where it was similar, that the incentive or rebate went to the contractor as well, so that the low income homeowner must not pay out of pocket, but it was still a rebate program. Thank you for that. So I'll throw out another question as folks are continuing to put their thoughts in the chat. So Ian, you mentioned that there was a goal, I think, and I don't know if I wrote it down correctly, but is it 130,000 homes by 2030?
120,000, yeah.
120,000 homes. So are you thinking that the rebate money will help you get to that goal, or is that like, are you going to be thinking about increasing that number?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely our hope that we can continue to sustain the levels of funding and hopefully increase the amount of projects per year that our weatherization program is able to do. I mean, I think I also said that we were currently not on track to achieve that. So I'm not sure we're going to increase that goal. Also, I don't think that goal is set by the department. it's
Ah.
set by the legislature, Melissa.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
for some context, that is a goal in state statute, and we are falling woefully behind. I think we're in the 30 to 40,000 homes weatherized. And again, remember that Vermont is a teeny state, and we have about 260,000 households in Vermont. So 120,000 goal is a significant portion of our overall housing stock. And just to clarify, because when we use weatherization, right, we're not just speaking about the low income Weatherization Assistance Program. That 120,000 statewide goal would be across all the homes in Vermont, both moderate income and market rate as well. So I don't think we'd be looking to increase the goal. I don't think we'd be advocating for that. It really is like helping us get somewhere that we likely are not going to get. That's by 2030. I don't know if we give that, but that would be by 2030 to get that number of homes. And this is just one more tool to help us get there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that was, I think, Edward's question that got answered. 120 homes is what % of all Vermont homes? So it sounds like close to half, eh?
Yeah.
That's quite a few. That percentage wise, that's a high percentage. So another question in the chat on that point, homes has a big market transformation element. How does market transformation fit into just using the weatherization program?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I would say we haven't gotten too far in our market transformation plan. But I would say we're building the market. We're bringing, this is all part of the same effort to, again, increase the number of contractors, increase the number of auditors, increase customer interest in weatherization, understanding around what weatherization is. And so I think market transformation can be looked at from several lenses. We don't think customers under 80% AMI really are going to have a good opportunity to participate in, say, market rate programs, and that this market really won't be driven just by customers receiving a rebate for a portion of the cost. So again, I think it's a different way of looking at market transformation. But again, raising customer awareness, raising understanding around the value of weatherization, and getting more of a workforce that can do work, both market rate and low income work in these homes.
Another question in the chat. Will we use the experiences of the cohorts as they come on board for learning and creating best practices?
We'd love to get in on one of the upcoming cohorts, either number 3 or number 4, and certainly leverage those, and very interested in what the learning and best practices that have come out of this first and second sprint states. If any of those are applicable, we're certainly interested in leveraging that for Vermont.
Great. Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing those best practices as well. Another question in chat, are you making any significant changes to the WEP program in Vermont to abide by the rebate requirements? That's a good question.
We are hoping not to. I'm not sure which specific requirements. I mean, mainly we've been focused on the energy savings requirements, the income verification requirements, the need to do an audit up front and at the back end. Our weatherization providers have been really cooperative and really open to making changes in order to accommodate receiving these funds and administering these funds. But I have not yet identified any significant changes to WAP that would be required. And again, we are still in, say, pretty early conversations with DOE about this concept, and we'll make changes if we need to. Yeah.
Right. So another question in chat, do you have the utility data for these homes?
For the vast majority of Vermont homes, we do not. So roughly 3/4, maybe a little bit more of Vermont homes are heated with unregulated fuels. So oil and propane are dominant here, some kerosene, lots and lots of wood. So that's underpinning our decision to use the modeled approach rather than the measured savings approach. We do have one natural gas regulated entity in a portion of the state, but they run their own efficiency programs and really wouldn't be the focus of the HOMES funds. It would be unregulated fuel. And as Ian mentioned, a really old housing stock. More than 1/4 of our homes were built before the 30s. and half were built before the 70s. So huge opportunity for weatherization in Vermont.
Sure. And you guys are probably affected by EPA's wood stove standards quite heavily up there. So it kind of, just for background, can you kind of talk about what your utility landscape looks like? You're talking, you have 260 homes overall in Vermont. What I would imagine you probably have one utility that covers the entire state, or how does that work?
So
You think?
on the electric side, we have 17 electric utilities.
17?
Yes, one
Impressive.
serves 75% of the state. Our one investor-owned utility serves the majority of customers in Vermont. And then there is a spattering of cooperatives and municipally owned utilities. The smallest electric utility has just over 600 customers in Vermont. So we have a diverse set of utilities at play in Vermont. And then, as I mentioned, we have the one natural gas regulated utility on the heating side that serves about 30 to 40,000 customers. So the majority of customers, again, are getting their heat from an unregulated source. All of our electric utilities are regulated. There are 17 of them. But again, the majority of the state is covered by one electric utility.
Well, have you had conversations with them? Because, you know, if you're converting folks from unregulated fuel sources and putting them on electric heat, or, you know, increasing the electricity usage in your state, what have your conversations with those utilities look like?
Yeah, our electric utilities are really gung-ho on electrification. They actually have some electrification mandates themselves to do what's termed energy transformation programs in Vermont, but those really are electrification. So they're already offering heat pump rebates, heat pump water heater rebates, and really aggressively looking at building load and increasing those electric sales. And to some extent, you know, having this reliance on unregulated fuels that tend to be more expensive does give us some comfort in terms of the conversation that I think is coming up soon about increasing utility bills for customers. For most customers, there is a value proposition of getting off of oil and onto electricity. So in that sense, that's less of a concern for Vermont here, is ensuring that the customer doesn't see increased costs.
Have you heard of any, I mean, I know you said unregulated fuels like wood, and so have you heard from any of those other industries about the possibility, you know, like how it will impact them because they're no longer providing these fuel sources to these homes?
We've heard, I wouldn't say as much from wood suppliers. We've heard a lot. We've heard some from the fuel dealers. Vermont also has, as of last year, a clean heat standard in effect that's requiring unregulated fuel dealers to reduce their emissions, essentially. So they have now, and that has not been implemented yet. It will be implemented in 2026 if, you know, with legislative approval. I'll save you the details. But essentially, they've read the writing on the wall, which is the state has very clearly indicated to our fuel dealers, you should be transitioning your business model either to lower carbon fuels or to doing electrification, to supporting your customers getting to electrification. In Vermont, we also have the majority of houses use multiple heating sources. My own house has an oil boiler with baseboard heating, as well as a wood stove, as well as 2 heat pumps. And that is completely typical of homes up here. Is people won't get rid of their wood stoves. They're going to still retain some sort of backup heating here. You know, we've had long conversations with DOE about the requirement that the heat pump be the primary heating source and whether that's really feasible in this kind of climate. So I think we'll continue to see a mix of fuels, but the overall trajectory being an increased reliance on electricity for heating and a reduction in fossil fuels.
Well, that's really interesting to hear about the variety of fuel sources that you have in your state. And it sounds like other places like Alaska, probably other northern states, have similar issues to deal with. In Missouri, I do have a wood stove myself that I like because I like the wood stove. But yeah, no, it is not our main heat source. So It looks like we're coming up to time on our session. If you have questions, additional questions, I'm sure Ian and Melissa would be happy to talk with you after the session, but I want to just thank Melissa and Ian for sharing your thoughts on applying the weatherization processes to your home energy rebate programs. And thank you for sharing your plans. Would love to hear from you in the future about how it's going and how it turns out with DOE. But thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it back over to Maddie.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Emily, for leading that conversation, and to Ian and Melissa for sharing your thoughts and plans. I'm going to turn things back over to David, who's moderating our next session.
Thanks, Maddie, and a great discussion. It really created more questions for me, but that's a good thing. That's part of the purpose. Well, next up, we have covering 100% of the cost under the HOMES program, and some of that, those comments and ideas we heard a little bit about in the earlier discussions, but we're going to dig in a little bit deeper. Lynn Retz, the Kansas Energy Office Director, is going to join us to provide her thoughts about that. The session is really based around a core issue in the DOE application for HOMES, which is the state's ability to propose higher levels of rebate under HOMES for low-income households. There are at least two core questions, many more, I'm sure, but how do you pick the dollar amount? And then, of course, what's the justification to provide to the Department of Energy? In the sample application, the department notes the State Energy Office will need to be aware that obviously if you increase the rebate level, you serve fewer households. That's kind of a given, but it doesn't provide a lot of concrete guidance beyond that. I think there are probably two sides to that coin. One could be that it allows for flexibility. The other could be we have a lot of discussion to do with DOE and among ourselves. And Lynn has been thinking a lot about this. We know from some of the early applicants that DOE is looking for more than just a mirror of what's in that limited guidance. And I think we'll hear some great thoughts from her about the conversations she's been having in Kansas, and to really help raise some of the issues we need to be thinking about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn Retz from Kansas. Lynn, thank you.
Yes, thanks, David. So yeah, some of this has already been covered by some of the previous presenters, but we have been talking internally about 100%, project coverage. What does that cap look like? And in conjunction with our weatherization program, how can we maximize dollars? How do we meet that justification requirement from DOE? So some of the conversation for the justification has been looking at couple of different approaches. One, weatherization program is also split across regions within the state. Looking at the percentage of low-income homes within each of those regions, could we do, and looking at the percentage of weatherization homes that are covered. So taking our percent of low income by region, how many of those are covered by weatherization? Could we increase the number of homes reached with weatherization and 100% match from the rebate side? Some pushback on that because we have certain regions that have a higher percentage of low income. So would that work or not? Similar to, I think, Vermont, do we just give all of our rebate dollars to weatherization program and work through them? Or do we keep the two programs separate? And the cap amounts. So when you look at the cap amount for the projects, how far would that go? $15,000 for some of our low income homes isn't going to be enough to get there. So how do we maximize the cap with 100% costs? And I'm open to any suggestions that anyone would have on that. And I don't, so we're really without answers, David. I'm just going to tell that right now. We're without answers. We are looking at also, I think someone previously mentioned, can we just focus on low income single homes, multi-homes for the cap, or do we have to do both? If we do 100% cap, 100% project coverage for single homes, do we also have to do it for the multi-homes? Or can we just do the 100% costs, project costs for single homes, but not do it for the multi-homes? So I guess, David, if there's additional questions around that, like I said, we're still in the early stage and still struggling with how we cover the 100% or of the project costs and how we're going to justify it.
And I think those are the right questions. I guess what I'm wondering, have you had any, I know there are so many unknowns, it's difficult for people to have reactions, but as you've talked to either other parts of state government or other stakeholders you're talking to, is their reaction generally, yeah, we should go down this path because of what it does for the consumer at the end of the day, wanting to help them, that is the goal. Is that generally sort of directionally where you see things moving, assuming you get through the department's requirements or statutory requirements?
We have had a lot of encouragement, especially from legislators that represent low income communities, to go this route of the 100% project costs coverage. I think some of our weatherization team, which is not housed in our agency, it's a different agency that does weatherization, has some concerns about our ability to do that. Mm-hmm. I know that in talking with the agencies that do the LIHEAP programs, they really do want us to try to go that path, but they also have some concerns about how we're going to justify it. But there's a lot of interest internally for us to do that.
Gotcha. This is a question that I had been thinking about in advance when Maddie and I talked about this panel, and I haven't found the right way to phrase it. So don't laugh too hard when I use the word simple. Is there something about paying 100% of the cost that, from an administrative perspective, customers should be the one in mind, but from an administrative perspective, that somehow makes this simpler? And I guess I just mean by that, that you're satisfying the entire need. There aren't multiple streams of funding. I'm sure that's not driving, your thinking in that way, but is there something about this that does simplify it on some level or not?
That is one of the things that came up early on in the conversations, is we think it would simplify, and especially when you're doing it as a reimbursement to the contractor, that it does simplify the process. It also kind of makes it, I think, in talking to different contractors, it makes it appealing to them as well, especially to go into the low income disadvantaged communities. They said it would make it more appealing to them.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Well, people are thinking about questions they may have in this area, or just thoughts, reactions they have. Would appreciate that. We may have, I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but just opening up, anybody have any issues they want to raise, or any questions for Lynn, or just comments on this topic? Are the states on the call thinking about approaching it this way?
Lynn, can I ask you a follow-up to something that you said, which was that your LIHEAP, peer organization wasn't sure about, justifying covering the entirety of the project cost. And I'm curious if it was a matter of not knowing the dollar amount to set, or if it was a question about, actually getting through the DOE application, or something else entirely.
Twofold. One, they were a little concerned about the cap amount. How would we determine that? How could we justify that? A lot of cap numbers have been tossed around. I think Vermont made the reference of 16,000. 15,000 was a number that came up in some of our conversations with potential contractors. Some saying that they thought that would be a reasonable cap to get 100% projects covered. Some saying depends on the part of the state, that may not be enough to cover it. So I think they were afraid when you start saying 100% project coverage, if you have a cap on it, that cap may not be sufficient in certain parts of the state. So is it really 100% coverage then? And then what do we do to make up that difference? So that's some of the conversation when you start looking at the diversity of the state, things that we're kind of encountering in conversations with the contractors.
Yeah, and my follow-up for the group, not just you, Lynn, is that I'm curious for states that might have run market rate energy efficiency programs, what those costs look like, and if they're higher, much higher than what you're seeing for weatherization programs. And that, I wonder if that'll give us a different or better insight into how much these projects will cost.
And that is something we have reached out to the utilities that have energy efficiency programs. Our weatherization group is pulling some data together for me. I don't have that data. I have a call with them tomorrow to try to get some data to see the average cost of some of these projects. So we would have a better idea, because we would use some of that weatherization data as a justification in our application for doing what we want to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a good follow-up to Grady had a question in the chat that along those same lines. And I think, that's something that has been in the front of my mind from day one on both programs, but this approach in particular. And I guess just one other item, and again, for Lynn or for the group, there in the Weatherization Assistance Program, homes that don't have structural, non-energy issues, structural or asbestos or whatever may be, things that can't typically be covered, a roof that's leaky, et cetera, that doesn't allow a project to move forward. And so they're deferred, which is a nice way of saying rejected in a sense, just because there's not money to pay for those items. And so we'll have the same issue in this area, even where we're covering 100% of the program costs. And I have seen numbers in program wide that are estimated, and weatherization estimated at 30%, as high as 30% deferrals. And I guess that's just one more item. I'm curious, Lynn, if anybody in your conversations has tackled the people we have to say no to, not only because we don't have enough rebate funds to cover everybody, but no to because of the condition of their home. And I think knowing that from the Weatherization Assistance Program in advance, so the homeowner isn't maybe told no twice, is that something else that people are thinking about, how to sort of cross-reference so that we don't tell the same consumer twice that, sorry, but your home's not in a condition we can help you.
That's one of the reasons why we really want to try to figure out how to partner with our weatherization program, so that we do prevent that no, because we have had that conversation with weatherization. And that's one of the things that they plan on having available for me tomorrow is what percentage do we have in the state of not being eligible or basically deferred in the state based on the different regions, because that was a concern going in. What do you do if it's deferred because they don't qualify for, the leaking roof? What do we do, Grady? Yeah, with those low, moderate income homeowners that the project cost is higher than the rebate. So we don't have the state general funds to put into the bucket. So another reason to try to maximize partnering with the other programs, rather that's weatherization or utilities that already have energy efficiency programs. That kind of becomes that how we partner to leverage all of the dollars if in fact the dollars in the rebate aren't sufficient.
Deal, very helpful. And I'm seeing some good comments in the chat for those maybe not watching. Vermont's market rate projects are averaging 10K versus 15K. We're estimating for a lower income household. Does not include some other items though as well. I think Maddie had suggested, I think we can do some digging around on this issue, which seems like a great idea. And also liked Marty's comment around what some utilities are able to do, at least in Missouri.
And yeah, Marty, that is why we were reaching out to our utilities, because they can use some of their weatherization funding for to support home readiness. And we do have some additional nonprofit resources in the state that we're trying to tap into for that very reason.
If I can jump in with another comment, it came up in the last session. I think something that we will need to be prepared to answer, maybe collectively as a group, is the question about market transformation and what are the options for market transformation if we're targeting all of these funds at, people with low incomes. And I think there's an obvious answer that this is just the priority and we're going to do what we need to do. But I think that might be where we get some pushback from DOE in terms of like, you're not going to be able to scale. And I think, states that are interested might need to be prepared to say, and that's okay with us. we just want to serve the people that we want to serve. And we're not looking for any big changes. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. So Lynn, please share how you're thinking about that.
So, I mean, that's been an ongoing conversation. Yes, the market transformation component of it, if we're just focused on low income. I will tell you that's been probably an even split discussion with legislators, because I have those legislators that are very much want this to be primarily focused on low income and reaching those communities that they feel like generally get left behind. So the disadvantaged low income communities, they absolutely want that to be the priority regardless of anything else. And then I have that other side of the legislative component who wants the market transformation to be kind of, at the forefront of some of these decisions. So trying to balance some of those conversations. I think overall, though, our focus is going to be the low income disadvantaged communities, just looking at some of the communities that we've had contact with that weatherization has not been able to address, because our weatherization program does have a wait list. So how can we also reduce their wait list in some of these disadvantaged communities, which are all going to be low income?
Yeah. And in the chat, well, two questions in the chat, unrelated, but I'm gonna do them in reverse order for a second, just based on what we're discussing. But the HOMES requirement for data, of course, and weatherization, I think on that market transformation question, I think the data access is obviously an important component of that. But the specific question is around, does weatherization require data, have a data requirement that could meet the BPI 2400 for measured? And I don't know the answer to that. We may have folks on the line that know the answer to that. If you do, please speak up. The second question is from Grady around manufactured housing versus a stick-built or brick and mortar, if you will. And just, are you thinking about manufactured homes in the same way, or just not making a distinction?
Okay, so Grady, on the manufactured homes, we have not made a distinction. We do have a fair number in the state of low income that will be manufactured homes. We have, at this point, not made that distinction. Kara, yes, you are correct. We have had those conversations with our WAP team regarding their data requirements versus what's going to be required of us. That is one of the WAP program's biggest concerns is our requirement for data. So appreciate the comment. Yes, the data access for homes requirements different than for WAP. They don't have it. We do. again, I think there's ways to get around that, even if we partnership with WAP. So exactly what that looks like, I can't tell you today, but I do think there's a way to get around those two requirements and still be able to leverage both programs.
Anybody else have any comments on this topic or questions? It's interesting. We're keeping close track, obviously recording this, but I mean, some of the questions that came up today, I think we clearly have some follow-up to do. Maddie has sent me a few messages in that regard, which I think is really helpful. I know Vermont obviously has been thinking about this as well. They may have additional thoughts, but the data piece really strikes me as a critical component to respond to that. I think, Kara, you are on point, obviously, with that. Maddie,
I just wanted to
go ahead, Maddie.
flag in the chat for Melissa in Vermont's comment that they're waiting on DOE to tell us whether or not the modeling software currently used by Weatherization could meet HOMES requirements, which is a thorn in my side as well. And I think is critical to executing any of these program designs we've been talking about the last couple of sessions.
Yeah. Yeah, we're kind of waiting on that DOE modeling software information. So Dylan, yes, we've gotten the preliminary feedback from DOE that all households also have to have access to homes. But at what point do they have to have that access? So our primary focus is going to be low income disadvantaged. And we're going to try to write our application with that being the priority. But how far do the dollars go in the state for our low income, especially with the mandatory multifamily requirement in addition to the low income? So that multifamily is above our low income requirement. That is something, again, we are also struggling with in the application process, how we will do that. At what point do moderate, high income get access to the program? So yeah, so manufactured homes, like I said, we're not distinguishing manufactured homes from any other type home.
Yeah, the all access requirement, I don't understand how that works practically speaking. I know how you could make it work from a legal perspective. I don't understand how it makes sense practically, but that is just me. If Jeff Genzer were on the call, he might be able to enlighten us, but I bet he would think the same thing. We'll see. We'll follow up certainly with DOE on this further. But Maddie, anything in the FAQs that we have missed in this area of all access?
Oh, yeah, great question. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear other states' thoughts who've gone through the cohort, because it seems like they might have the most up-to-date information as opposed to what is posted in the FAQs. Because yes, I'm on the same page as you, David, which is like, should be obvious that you are allowed to hone in on whatever segment you want, but it looks like based on the feedback that I'm seeing in the chat that conversations with DOE are revealing that is not the case. So it might be worth either us or someone putting in a specific question on that front.
I think the question to DOE along those lines needs to be, at what point does it need to be made available to them? Because that's what we're struggling with based on our understanding. So we're going to make low income at this point our priority, with the multifamily requirements in there as well. But if the dollars serve our low income based on the return of applicants, what if there's not much left? Can we dedicate the first year to exclusively low income and then open it year two? I mean, what does that look like that we have to make it accessible to all? That may be some additional pushback along the way, because if we open it to low income first, DOE says you have to make it accessible to all at some point, then I can see constituents in Kansas saying, hey, you have to make it eligible to all of us. So that has to be from day one. If we don't have something specific to back that up, and then how do you ensure that you're meeting your low income percentage requirement that DOE has set for you? That becomes an additional issue.
And I would bet your administrative costs are going to increase significantly because in effect, you're running two different programs. Which is just what we want to avoid, because then more dollars go to administration than they do actually serving people. So that, I mean, it really is incongruous. This is as usual with thank you to Adam for agreeing to follow up with GC and follow up with us on this. I think it is. We have not been very successful in turning these around when GC makes their decision, but I think this is another one where there are a lot of unintended consequences in that, not least of which are higher administrative costs than necessary and less people served by virtue of requiring what amounts to two different programs for two different sets of constituents. So and good follow-up with Kara. I think, Kara, we should definitely follow up on the weatherization question and BPI 2400. I'm sure you've thought through that already, or at least to some extent. So hopefully we can follow up on that. Any other questions before we wrap up, or any additional thoughts, either Lynn or Maddie?
Sorry, Lynn, but I just wanted to make an offer to folks as they are, parsing through this question in the application. If we can do anything to help strategize around how you're answering this question, we'd be happy to, either get some states together or lend our own minds to help get this question asked. And we will do some digging as much as we can to the costs of market rate programs. To do some comparisons and maybe find a way to justify a higher cap than what you might be seeing with your weatherization program. So just let us know if there's anything we could do to help answer this question, and we're happy to do so. Lynn, anything you want to add, or David?
But real quickly, Bettina's comment in the chat, if you haven't seen it, I thought exactly the same thing, Bettina. That's why I am mystified. It's not the first time I've heard the back and forth. I think sometime last week this came up for me, but that's exactly what I was thinking about. And that's a complete disconnect. So thanks for pointing out the FAQ 25. If you have not looked, do take a look at that, because it would certainly lead you to believe you can do exactly what would make practical sense, which is to have criteria that allocate and prioritize as best the state sees fit and probably best meets people's needs. But in any case, didn't mean to interrupt. Lynn, if you had any.
That's exactly why we started down the path we did with the low income priority, and pretty much solely focused on low income single family and the multifamily. But then to hear back from DOE's individuals that, no, you can't do that. That's not going to be allowed. Okay, where do we go now? But at a minimum, we would look at probably focusing for the first year at a minimum on exclusively low income and the multifamily requirements. Okay.
Okay. Well, unless there's anything else you have to add, Maddie, maybe we'll end the session here, but we have an awful lot of follow-up on this one, a lot more unanswered questions, of course, than as we started the session. We essentially implied that's where we are. That was sort of the point of it. So really appreciate that. And we have data questions to follow up on. The split, if any, between allowing access to different kinds of programs. I also think following up with some of our affiliate partners on implementation about we have to keep looking for ways to lower administrative costs. And if you have in effect two different programs for two different types of constituents, from an income perspective, how do we approach this in a way that isn't going to cause the cost to skyrocket? But those were my last few things. Did you have anything else, Maddie or Lynn? Okay. Well, we're going to take a short break feel free to stick around in the chat or take a coffee break. We're going to come back at 3:15 Eastern time, so just about 30 minutes from now, 29 minutes from now, and talk to you shortly. Thanks, Lynn, especially for working through what is a very tough set of issues. Very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Hi again, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us through the break. We've got two more topics to cover this afternoon. First up, we'll be talking about the potential and hopeful prevention of utility bill increases with electrification projects under the HEEHR program. And then we will round out the afternoon discussing income verification. And I want to give all of the NASEO affiliates on the line a little bit of time to think about income verification, because during that session in particular, after we hear some states share about how they plan on doing income verification, we'll love to hear from you all about what it typically looks like, and how you do income verification day to day. So let's get started with our utility bill session. I believe we've got our panelists on the line, so I'm going to turn things over to Puck and Ben to be our state's speakers during this session. Over to you guys whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Maddie. Good to be here. Nice to see all these friendly faces of folks who are in the trenches the same way we are. I'll introduce myself first and then hand it over to Ben. So my name is Puck Stair, and I am the relatively new director of the New Mexico State Energy Office. Been doing this since September, and before I came from the private sector, doing a lot of transactional and green work there. And I will just say, in New Mexico, we found ourselves inadvertently at the front of the line with HEEHR and HEEHR. We were part of the first sprint cohort, so we have already submitted both applications and have spent a lot of time over the past few months thinking about this issue of how to prevent utility bills from inadvertently being raised. So that does not mean we have the solutions. It just means maybe we're really familiar with the problem. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben to introduce himself.
Thanks, Puck. Yeah, hi, Ben Brower. I'm the Energy Bureau Chief, manage the State Energy Office here in Montana. We're housed in our Department of Environmental Quality. Great to see a bunch of familiar names on this call. I myself have also been in this job for only just about 9 months now, but been with the Energy Office now for about 8 years. We don't yet have our applications in, we do have our early admin funding, but not the full application. We're standing up an RFP to select a contractor to help us with both program development and implementation. This topic is of particular interest to me, with Montana being quite a cold climate at certain times of the year, of course, and wrestling with how to ensure that these programs are rolled out in a way that protect consumers from bill increases. So looking forward to sharing a little bit more about what we've got in mind here in Montana and hearing from others as well. Back to you.
Thanks, Ben. So this is an interactive session. This is not just me and Ben talking at you. In other words, we have not prepared remarks to fill the whole time. We wanted to let the best ideas float to the surface. So we wanted to start with a couple of polls, actually, for you all to kind of get a sense of the room. So Maddie, if you can launch our poll question 1. Yeah, so this is just, where is your state in the HEEHR and HEEHR application process? If you can just take a few minutes to click in. Maybe you haven't begun the application, maybe you're partway through writing it, maybe you have submitted one or the other applications. Answer the questions however suits you best. And then the other question is just, how much have you been able to think about mitigating potential utility bill increases associated with the HOMES rebate? And again, we're restricting you to one answer there. If you are clicking the bottom answer, we have solved it, then Ben and I will stop talking and hear what you have to say. So yeah, if you can take a few minutes to click in your answers, and then I think we'll share the results with everyone. And I guess I have to do it too. And so obviously, yes, that's what we're trying to do. I think the problem goes without stating, which I think everyone on this call is aware of, the fact that sort of a thoughtless electrification has the potential to wind up raising utility bills depending on everyone, the price of natural gas or what you're converting from, or the price of electricity, or how leaky is the envelope and all of that. So we have this challenge ahead of us of how do we electrify and keep utility rates the same or less. So that is what we're going to work on today. So Maddie, I don't know if you can share the results of the poll. Okay, thank you. Great timing. I'll let everybody digest that. So it looks like 40% haven't begun. Great, they're gathering info. 53% have made some sort of process. 7% have submitted an application. And then 70% have not thought about this topic at all. 27% have thought a little bit. 37 a lot. 20 or somewhat, and then 20 a lot, and darn it, no one has solved it. I was hoping. Okay, great. I think that gives us all a sense of each other. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben to talk about kind of where Montana is in your thoughts and in your possible solutions.
Great, thanks. So as I mentioned, we have our early admin funds. We're preparing an RFP to select a contractor that will both help us design the program and ultimately implement both of these programs together in parallel. This is going to be a new undertaking for our office. We have not run residential rebate programs, and so we're getting into some new territory in delivering this program. Just a little bit of context, Montana, big state, not a lot of people. And so I think that the geography of this state is going to challenge the rollout of this program. But specific to the topic that we're getting into today, we have a couple of investor-owned utilities here. One that serves about 60% of utility customers in the state, Northwestern Energy, and then 25 rural electric cooperatives. And so, there's going to be a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different household heating scenarios, and ultimately household utility bills and utility bill impacts that might come from the rollout of these programs. Right now in Montana, about 50% of households heat with natural gas, and we see about 25% of our households primarily heating with electricity. My guess is that is almost exclusively electric resistance heat. There really is just a nascent heat pump industry building up here in the state right now. The remainder is split between propane and wood heat, especially in the western part of the state, where there are quite a lot of forests and a lot of firewood at hand. So what we're struggling with here is of course, as many of you are, is with electrification of heating loads, how to ensure that we mitigate utility bill impacts to those households. And we're thinking through a handful of different strategies, with the disclaimer that we haven't made any final decisions yet on exactly the scope of our program. Looking forward to bringing on a competent contractor to help us with these decisions and analyze the data in a lot more detail. But first up, in terms of strategies, we're strictly, we're thinking about how can we prioritize outreach and promotion of these programs, especially electrification of heating loads. How can we prioritize those incentives, those rebates towards households that are already on electric resistance heat and or heating with delivered fuel, propane being the primary here in Montana, where those heating costs are likely to be higher than natural gas, of course. So right up front, looking about promotion and outreach, and $70 million for the state across 2 rebate programs. I think honestly it'll go pretty quickly. So we will have our bases covered, just sort of narrowing the focus of our outreach to those households. Other options, of course, on our mind, there's some potential for on-site solar to mitigate higher electricity bills, although it's still yet to be seen exactly what solar for all is going to look like in Montana. We're also looking at options where we can continue to utilize dual fuel setups. In other words, leaving in place existing gas or propane, even wood stoves, to cover extreme cold scenarios, and then to pick up a a good chunk of the shoulder season heating loads with heat pumps where they can really operate at their highest efficiency. It's a scenario that we've seen some installers entertaining here in Montana. Even with good cold climate heat pumps, there's certainly are going to be days while you're struggling in Montana. This last winter gave us one good instance where lows of -30 for 3 or 4 days in the middle of January hit most of the state, and obviously that's challenging to get through with heat pumps alone. Another priority for us is with retrofitted homes, really to hit the shell measures hard, and to the extent that we can prioritize shell measures, insulation, and weatherization, air sealing prior to leaning hard on electrification of heating loads. And then our last strategy that we have in mind at this stage is really robust modeling and disclosure of potential bill impacts. And that, as I said, with 25 different, more than that, 27 different utility service territories and a pretty broad mix of home heating fuels, will really have to be tailored on a very household by household basis to ensure that, that people are getting the best estimate of what those bill impacts will be. But I think that's going to have to be an essential component of both the disclosure and the evaluation of what measures make most sense to a household. So that's where we're sitting right now. Looking forward to hearing what others are up to too. Back to you, Beck.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for that hint that after I finish talking, we're going to try to do a 100-person group discussion. So get ready for that. And the first question is going to be, what are some measures that you are thinking about? Not necessarily committed to, but get ready to maybe type in the chat or raise your hand of just sharing what are some ideas that you as a state are thinking about. I'll give you a minute to think about that and tell you what we did in New Mexico is very similar to Ben. We started with an analysis of obviously our climate and our housing stock. New Mexico is very poor. 32, all but one of our counties are J40 communities right off the bat. And, 80% of families who live here would meet some sort of poverty guidelines, which means that our housing stock is not the tightest. We have old houses, we have drafty houses, we have houses that have been under-maintained. And so they are the opposite of good envelopes. We also have, in terms of climate, a really complicated climate. So New Mexico, everyone, yes, we're south, but we're also high. We're about a mile high. So we are not like Arizona. Well, let me clarify that. Our southern half has a climate similar to Arizona, and our northern half has a climate similar to Colorado. So when you intersect that with the housing stock and the fact that we also have not just old housing, but a wide variety of housing, lots of mobile homes, lots of adobe homes, lots of flat roofs, lots of, older Victorians, you name it. There's a wide variety of architectural styles and builds and ages. It makes for a very diverse challenge. And so the very first thing we did in drafting our HEEHR and HEEHR applications was to fortunately partner with NREL and have them run some analysis of the housing stock in New Mexico, with specifically an eye towards where do we think utility bills might drop? Or do we have to switch? Oh, and I missed that most of our state fuels off of natural gas, nearly all of it. There are some heat pumps, but it's like 80% natural gas, which is relatively cheap here. So we asked NREL some questions, if you're switching from just switching to natural gas, what does that look like? Switching from natural gas to heat pump. If you do envelope first and then switch from natural gas to heat pump, does that work? Does it make a difference whether we're switching to a regular heat pump or a high efficiency heat pump? Does it make a difference if we're switching from propane, which we have some of? And NREL wonderfully ran all this data within a week for us and essentially came back with a really helpful sole data point, which is pretty much the only way for us to ensure that utility bills do not rise is to make sure that we're switching from propane, at least in the cold climates, from propane to high efficiency heat pumps. Regardless of what we do with the envelope, in that case, we have pretty good data to tell us if that's what we're doing on the ground, we're going to be okay. Every other combination comes with a caution label. It doesn't necessarily mean that the utility bills are going to raise, but there is a probability of that. Again, depending on the house, is it an adobe roof, is it a Navajo hogan, etc. So what that did is it prompted us to really think about stacking the programs smartly here in HEEHR. So coming out of that, we decided to, no matter what, to really try to launch those programs together at the same time so that we can use HEEHR to seal the envelope and work on insulation. And then we can come in with HEEHR or 50121 and 50122, whatever you call them, to electrify the house and with install heat pumps. So we're very intentional from the beginning is to not just sort of stand up the programs whenever they're available, but to really sequence them and make sure that they're firing at the same time. Which then led us to the third question of, wait a minute, going through multiple programs in order to not raise utility bills is going to be a challenge for folks on the ground. And so we realized we needed to offer those stacked programs in an organized, orderly way with basically case management. So we wrote into our applications this idea, which hopefully we can pull off, called creating and hiring a fleet of energy coaches. And these are folks that can kind of do a light audit, not an official, PP 2400 audit, but a light audit, help individual homeowners understand what that particular home needs, and then almost hand walk them through the process of applying for some of our local programs or the HEEHR program or the HEEHR program, or as Ben mentioned, the Solar for All program. What is the right combination for that particular scenario? It is resource intensive. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be a lot of time and energy invested in each individual house. But really, that is the only way that we think that we can get through this without utility bills raising. And we even put this in our applications a little bit, that there is a mandatory risk assessment before we even start the work that would be conducted by these energy coaches. And if the risk of the utility bill increasing is more than 25%, then we have to advise the homeowner in writing and decide how to proceed from there. So at least that they would have noticed that this is a risk. So that's what we're doing in New Mexico. And with that, we're going to try for this 100-person discussion. And I'm glad to see there's some questions or notes in the chat. So I turn it to you all. What are some ideas that you are kicking around, or some ideas that won't work that you want to share with the group? And you can either raise your hand, your little Zoom hand, or I think Ben is working through the chat and can lift up some of those comments as well.
Talk while we're waiting for folks to raise their hands and jump into the conversation. Just a couple of notes from the chat. So Marty from Missouri notes that part of the issue related to projecting bill impacts is getting the historical usage or billing data, assuming that we can't just require utilities to give us the data, or that data are unavailable for new construction or new tenants. What is the best approach? Is that something you've thought through in your scenarios?
Yeah, we have. In New Mexico, we're also in that situation with our PUC that we as a state cannot require that data from our utilities. Some of you may be in states in a more favorable situation. So we have two solutions to that. One is working with utilities on a voluntary opt-in basis. So we are hoping that as part of the program, when folks enroll, residents will sign a little digital form, consenting to the release of their data, and then we can take that to the utility and see if the utility will release it. The other solution that we came up with is, if we think what we're about to do to a house is risky to raise utility bills, is we won't move ahead unless the homeowner does give us the historical data. So at least we have something to start with. And so that would be something else that they would do in writing. What are you doing in Montana?
Haven't gone down that path just
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, Tom.
Go ahead.
Oh, we can't hear you, Tom. You're not muted in Zoom. Okay, 1 minute. And maybe while Tom gets situated, we can go to the next comment in the chat.
Yeah, just flagging for folks' awareness, the offer from Maddie to make an introduction, presumably with NREL for a similar kind of analysis as what Buck described for New Mexico. Thank you for that offer, Maddie. Haja has a question for you. Would it be possible for you to expand on the reason you decided to not, or sorry, on the reason you decided to require envelope upgrade or not?
You want to take that one first, Ben?
We have not made those decisions yet, so we're not yet at a point of being able to say whether we're going to require the envelope upgrades for electrification.
Yeah, Haja, great question. And just to clarify, sorry if I misspoke, New Mexico is not requiring envelope upgrades, but we wanted to make sure that the HEER program is available at the same time. The two home energy rebates programs are available at the same time in case an energy coach determines that in this particular home, it's really best to do an envelope upgrade. In that case, the rebates are available to the homeowner at that time, and it's not an undue burden. Tom, and then we'll go to Bettina.
I'm not sure if I resolved audio.
You did.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, thank you very much, Montana, Montana, Vermont, New Mexico. You have a lot of similar issues to Alaska, particularly New Mexico. Most of our state is blue in the J40 with substandard rural housing, much of it off the road system and not anywhere near being connected to any kind of utilities whatsoever with, rural powerhouses. So the fuel switching is front and center here. Plus, also, do we have enough funds to actually make an impact in some of those communities? But with regard to the heat pumps, we share some similar issues. We've got, from east to west, we're about 1,200 miles long and about 900 miles wide with 4 different distinct climatic zones. In the southeast of our state, heat pumps make a huge amount of sense based on the fact with no availability to a natural gas pipeline. We have low-cost hydro communities there in the about 10 cents a kilowatt hour and a mild climate. So it's kind of a no-brainer in that region, which is not really our CJ40 areas either. That's where our state capital is and so forth. But one of the ideas that we're working with now with a great concern, particularly putting a large number of heat pumps in Arctic environments, which can run part of the time. And then you have, diesel fuel switching issues and whether or not a powerhouse has the capacity to provide, has enough load capacity, let alone the distribution infrastructure. So that might self-select due to the lack of funds of having to import, these types of equipment twice to the Port of Alaska, Anchorage, and then out into the bush, extremely expensive. So we kind of look on our, what we call our rail belt, which is utility connected areas and coastal regions. And one of the thoughts is that in the heat pump, it specifies that there needs to be kind of a minimal site assessment and this calculation of unacceptable costs and make some sort of a policy on that. So, it's from a practical standpoint, it's like, okay, am I going to rely on a contractor to do that? No. So some third party who has some wherewithal should be performing that, the site assessment, not so much, but doing that economic analysis for each individual home is kind of critical. And, what are you going to do? Pay somebody $200 to go out there ahead of it? That's not going to happen. So I was thinking about making a pathway through HEEHR where for heat pumps, once there has been an energy rating, which we have our own system for, auditing for our environment, we've been running for about 30 years through our agency, get that rating, the pre and the post assessment. And at that time, have someone who is actually trained, highly trained in energy efficiency measures, do additional training for them for heat pumps, in addition to the, weatherization or envelope type scenarios in HEEHR, and say, basically run them through what we have developed in-house through a contractor is a heat pump calculator, which accounts for various types of fuel switching and loads, climatic issues, whether or not you can only operate in shoulder months and so forth, because we have combinations of diesel fuel, bunker fuel, wood burning stoves, coal, propane, and in some areas a home might have all of those, for redundant backups because of our severe climates in some areas. So, going through that and not relying on the homeowner to actually operate this heat pump calculator, we'll probably do some additional contracting once we receive our early administrative funds, to modify that and so that it monetizes rather than adjusting. Our program uses the Energy Star ratings, just that to, the 20 or 35% threshold in HEEHRs, then essentially modifying the heat pump calculator to, instead of saying, hey, you're, with your capital costs, if any, versus your utility costs, whatever your fuel mix is, run that calculation through and monetize it so it makes sense to homeowners, requires a huge amount of consumer education and outreach, as Ben had pointed out, so that they're making an informed decision. So, the question comes up, I mean, how are we in a position as a public entity to make a decision? What is an unacceptable increase in utility costs, given all of these different variables? So is it, 5%, 10%, 20, 30? So essentially having guiding the homeowner after some education, and you have, legal disclaimers and disclosures. Yes, I've watched the video. Yes, I've consulted with. Yes, I've read this. Yes, I've certified that I have this, certified energy rater or auditor come through, take and run that calculator with the most granular data that is available. I mean, you have to have complete disclosure on all the previous year's utility bills, and it kicks out a number, plus or minus. Maybe it's 30% above what their normal costs are. I ran this calculator on myself. I'm in Anchorage, have access to natural gas, a lot higher cost electricity, and I probably wouldn't do it even if it was free, quite frankly, if I was eligible. So taking that advice, we also have some other issues. If a homeowner is in a position where their heat source, maybe their boiler is ready to fail. A lot of aging building stock here, 35-year-old Wheel McLean natural gas boiler, but they don't have the $8,000 or whatever it takes to fix that. Maybe going for a heat pump and increasing your bill a little bit is better than, on a monthly basis, is a better option for that person under their hopefully informed discretion to say, yeah, I would rather incur some higher costs, in the interim, rather than having to find a way to replace what is now my primary heating system with the heat pump as a supplement, and maintaining that heating system for those cold winter periods that we have here. And another issue is, British Petroleum has pulled out of our state, sold off their assets to a smaller oil field operation company, and they are now not renewing the natural gas energy contracts to all of our major rail belt utilities. So we anticipate at some point that the delta between, natural gas, which is typically, much lower in cost per unit for thermal than electricity, a homeowner might want to hedge their bets, because our utility mix costing is bound to change pretty dramatically in the next few years because of our natural gas constraints. So that's an individual decision, which is a really tight rope to cross, assuming that you can educate a consumer, and and a lot of them lower income folks who may or may not have the wherewithal to make that kind of a decision, to make the determination as to whether or not their utility bill is unacceptably increased overall. So that's one idea.
Wow, thank you, Tom. There's so many gems in what you just said. Just three things that I just want to underline, and then we'll go to Bettina. So one is, I think you and I have both arrived at, there's probably a very strong need for a third party check and balance, so that the contractor is not also the same person recommending the changes to the house, because there's, you know, we want to make sure that they're fair and they're real changes. So I think we've both arrived at like a neutral third party check and balance. The second, you mentioned the heat pump calculator. That's brilliant. I want to borrow it. I hope you can put it in the chat. Maybe I think I don't know what software you used, but I think that's a great idea. I'd love to dig more into that later. And then this is another topic, maybe Maddie and NASEO, but the filling the gap. You know, the HOMES rebates are very generous, but when you're dealing with low and moderate income folks, they still have $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 they have to pay out of pocket, and that might block all the projects right there, stop them cold. So we have some ideas about filling the gap, but I think that's a whole nother webinar, but maybe you'll host one. Bettina, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. I feel like I'm still digesting everything that Tom shared. Trying to remember what my question was. That was really interesting. Thank you. I am really inspired by this topic of the energy coach that you mentioned, and I apologize. I might just ask you to kind of repeat what you said. I want to make sure I understand where a household might get this flag if they have preconditions that could lead to a risk of utility bill increase. You have this data from NREL that shows, generally speaking, which households have these conditions. It sounds like a lot of them, but it wouldn't be, when in the process would that flag arise? Someone would come in and would everybody be connecting with an energy coach? And it sounds like you are rolling out HOMES and HEEHR together. So is it regardless of HOMES HEEHR, everyone will be assigned an energy coach, they will do the assessment? And the last part of the question is, in a replacement situation where someone, you know, can connect with the programs through a contractor, sounds like that contractor would refer them to the energy coach, who would do the assessment, flag a household as appropriate, and then pass them back. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, you've got it right. And we're still fleshing this out ourselves. So I welcome any feedback or ideas, but the idea is that the energy coach has basically two main touches, one at the top of the project while it's still just in discussion mode, and then again on the back end. And so, yes, Bettina, at the top of the project, the energy coach would work with the homeowner again to kind of do a mini assessment of that house, like what Tom was saying, but not as good. I'm going to steal his ideas. And work with the homeowner on, well, here's the 4 things you need, you know, and this is the sequence we should do them in, you know, envelope, EV charger, whatnot. And then just kind of run the numbers and decide together with the homeowner if that's something that they want to bite off and chew. And during that, the energy coach will be looking at, we spell this out, these are the things to look at to determine the level of risk of utility bills increasing. So the home age, the climate, level of insulation, and the level of air sealing and duct sealing, the fuel type, and if the home is switching from wood, LP, or natural gas, and then looking backwards into the estimated or the past annual energy use pattern, if it's available, and then trying to project forward into the future. And then you picked up right off the bat that yes, the energy coaches, we're trying to design this cleverly, will essentially they will umbrella across all of the grants that we have and all of the state programs they have. So essentially they can recommend any of those state programs. And I will just say for the group, the DOE signed off on this and is allowing us to invoice in very specific ways. So if the energy coach, you know, has a 4-hour conversation with someone, well, let's hope it's not 4 hours, but if it's 4 hours and they talked about 4 different programs, they would invoice 1 hour to HEEHR, 1 hour to HEEHR, 1 hour to Solar for All, and then maybe 1 hour to one of our state programs. And the DOE's okay with that as long as we're very clean in the accounting. So the reason we want to do that is because, of course, sacking and braiding is the way to solution, but it is so difficult to put that burden on an individual homeowner. So we thought, well, we'll take that burden on ourselves. And we're going to try it. We don't know how well this is going to work, but we're going to try it.
Thank you so much. One follow-up question. Are you anticipating that those energy coaches will be employed in your office, either as permanent employees or contractor?
It'll be a contractor, probably a sub of a subcontractor.
Under one program?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
thank you.
Under yet to be determined. We're kicking around the RFP for the energy coaches and figuring out how the best way to structure it right now.
Okay. Godspeed. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Ben, over to you for anything in the chat.
Yeah, there's a couple more questions in the chat worth getting to. One from David. Have you thought about a rule that requires disclosure of likely bill impacts? Puck, I guess in your case, it sounds like you're planning a fairly robust disclosure system. Have you formalized it in some fashion that you'd care to share?
We've thought about it. We are working on our legislative wish list for the next legislative session in January. So maybe we can get that done. We do want to launch Here and Her before then. We're trying to launch it at Labor Day. So we had to come up with a way to start the program without that rule in the background. But yes, we have thought about it. And if anyone has any advice on how to structure those rules to force utilities to hand over the data, I would love to sidebar with you.
Great. Thanks, David, for prompting that. Question from Ben Bunker. Another one for you here, Puck. What percentage of households in New Mexico fit into the category of shifting from propane to high efficiency heat pumps in cold climates? I think he's probably referring to that NREL analysis that you mentioned earlier.
Not very many, just 10%, but I think as other folks on the call have referenced, the HOMES rebates sound like a lot of money, but when you actually start doing the math, it's not that many houses. We're easily going to spend that out. So even if we just focused on that 10%, there's more than enough need there to consume all of the grants.
Yep, and we've done a similar high-level analysis, not with the benefit of NREL's assistance yet, but come to a similar conclusion that $70 million across two programs just isn't going to go too far. And if we just stuck with propane and electric resistance households, we'd probably have our bases pretty well use up that money pretty quickly. Thank you both for the questions there.
Yeah, we're in our final minutes. So I actually would love to see a show of hands for those of you who are writing the applications. Have you written down anything yet regarding utility bill, the risk of utility bill raising, or tried to draft anything? You don't have to say anything. I'm just curious how many people have taken a stab at it.
Well, full disclosure, if you raise your hand, we might call on you. So go ahead. I'm interested in particular in any of my cold climate cohort, digging around for names here, northern tier states, how you're wrestling with this. Ian, I see you out there. I'm curious if you could share Vermont's perspective on how you guys are handling utility bill impacts in a cold climate state.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit during our session. But mostly because so much of the households that we're going to reach are heating with unregulated fuels like oil and propane, it's less of a concern than if they were switching from natural gas.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Anything else burning or any questions you want to ask your peers here?
You have a quick statement. regarding the scenario that I just outlined, which is, kind of something new and under consideration, we'd also, I think it makes the most sense to have a pathway where there's been, envelope work done first, but in some cases, newer homes might not require that. So, we're thinking about paying for all or most of the energy rating, and there might be a pathway directly like, hey, I'm not going to do the envelope measures because either I don't, can't get enough of a savings off of that, and then that bypassing to from the post assessment directly into heat pump suitability. This is making a lot of assumptions as to our energy raters, and I don't want to be bearer of bad perspective, but Alaska was the first state to have a home energy rebate program, which started in 2008, ran that for 10 years with about $30 million, reached 26,500 homes roughly. And at that time, we had a lot of industry and intellectual capital that raised up to meet that, and it was wide open for everyone. There were no income limitations. It was pretty a lot of do-it-yourself, whereas this requires contractors to be involved. But that program ended 5-6 years ago, and we have gone from 150 energy raters around the state. We're making a pretty good living doing this, and some specialty contractors and supplement contractors. And from that time, we now have about 14. So as far as the market, transformation impacts, and things have changed a little bit, technology and perspectives a bit here in recent years, but we have found that in lack of the incentive, they're just, we're having to rebuild everything to try to meet the needs and the requirements of this program. So the energy raters also, I really like your idea of, trying to do a wraparound with them. But again, it's like, how are they going to be compensated, for all the additional work, and, asking to bill in different kinds of increments where, government or in law, you're used to, billing to different grant funds and all of that. A lot of folks out there aren't. So it seems like there's some potential landmines with commingling funds. So that's a bit of an issue, but also had thought about having them as training them up to be energy advisors and be more of a project manager, and also trying to get some nonprofit aggregators in the mix as well to serve that purpose, and trying to figure out how to fund them, and and what that looks like, because there isn't a lot of guidance on the role or definition of an aggregator, so they could also perform that function to kind of be an advocate for the homeowner in this kind of complicated process.
Thanks, Tom. You must have a microphone in my office because we're tracking 100% on what are the challenges, what are some of the solutions. And we also are, one of the reasons that we're inventing this energy coach idea is that there aren't enough actual auditors to do the work. We have 8 in the state of New Mexico. 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So like you were also using Trek and EAT to try to train those folks up and, rebuild, like you said, from nothing. I think we're at time. So this was really, really great. Thank you everyone for participating in the poll and for pitching in and asking your questions. And my takeaway is I do not feel so alone in the struggle. There are all of you here on the call who are also struggling with some of the same questions. So I'll turn it over to Ben if you have any closing words, and then Maddie can take us out.
No, thanks all for chipping in, and good luck. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for contributing to that last conversation. We're going to transition now to our last topic of the day, which is income verification. So we've got Eddie Trevino lined up, and unintentionally quite a diversity of geography. We've got Texas and Rhode Island representation. So if Eddie is here, we'll go ahead and turn things over to him, and he can start us off with this topic. And I will copy Puck's model and warn people now to be ready to participate, especially our affiliates. We would love to hear from you. But for now, Eddie, over to you.
Thanks, Maddie. Hi, this is Eddie Trevino, State Energy Office in Texas. to give you an update where we are as an introduction to the income verification piece. We have not submitted an application. We are planning to submit an application. We are also planning to ask for early admin funds as well. So what we're doing right now is we're developing our RFP, and at the same time we're using that information to for early admin funds application. We've been talking to a lot of people about income verification. It's obviously an important piece because it's basically step one in the process. So one of the things that we're leaning towards right now is categorical eligibility. And just because of the simplicity of it, we will stay away from self-attestation of income and just focus on the categorical eligibility component. And that's the intent when we issue RFP, is to aim in that direction. We're also concerned, on income verification, that there are certain aspects of income verification in terms of the technology that we're going to be requiring as part of the income verification piece. Oh, and what I didn't tell you first is that we are planning to submit one RFP for the administration of both the HOMES and the HEEHR programs. And because of the risks associated with gaps that could potentially be created with two separate administrators, we're gonna go with one administrator to try to minimize any potential impact of those gaps. And then on income verification, we're focusing on an online type web-based application that's also mobile phone accessible and multi-factor authentication. And so we'll be looking for software that enables the braiding and layering of rebates, that potentially enables coupon or voucher redemption. It's going to, of course, it has to be API connectable to both PNNL and then probably to the IRS for the taxpayer identification numbers. So we're looking at a high level of requiring those types of features and interfaces within our income verification piece. And most importantly, on the back end, we want it to be reporting capable. So we'll be asking for a dashboard, centralized documentation, and then also cross-checking capabilities between the two programs. So that's probably the type of information that we're going to be looking for when we ask for our RFP and issue our RFP, and when we check the systems that are proposed as part of in response to the RFP, those are the types of features we're going to be looking for. So, Maddie, that's where we are in Texas. I know Rhode Island may be far ahead of us, but I'll let Stephen talk about his program and where they are as well in terms of their income verification.
Great, thanks, Eddie. And like many speakers today, I certainly don't have all the answers when it comes to these things, but I will share how Rhode Island is approaching this and kind of where we're at in the process, and definitely interested in other thoughts and questions from other states about income verification. So first, a little bit of the background of where we're at and how we're approaching this is we are focusing on the HEEHR program first, the appliance rebates program, and try to knock out that application first and then shift our focus to the HEEHR program after that. But we are hoping, this spring or within, the first 6 months of this year, we have both applications into DOE. And so our program design with the HEEHR program and the appliance rebates program is we are intending to primarily implement that program by partnering with our CAP agencies, or our community action partnership agencies in the state. They are, our geographic-based nonprofits that already provide weatherization, and they implement our Weatherization Assistance Program and LIHEAP programming to residents in the state. And so it is our hope to use them as our primary vehicle to have them also offer the additional upgrades of the HEEHR program while they're serving these homes as an additional measure that, of course, gets kind of billed to a different account of sorts and managed through that process. So for income verification, we are with this in particular, we're also intending for this to largely be driven by the categorical eligibility, specifically those that are already engaged in LIHEAP or the Weatherization Assistance Program. And we're, looking at some of the other categorical eligibility options and considering, setting up MOUs with our other state agencies as needed. If there's other categorical eligibility programs that would make sense, and we could have that data sharing of, household and household income to be able to grant that. Of course, we're realizing as we're trying to evaluate that a lot of these different federal programs do have different household income guidelines. So these new home energy rebates and their income levels don't necessarily match up with all the other federal programs. So we are trying to navigate that and make sure we aren't, catching anybody that would be outside of eligibility for these programs. What else? We do intend to also allow people to verify their incomes by providing documents to us, and hopefully we can connect that directly in with the PNNL API tool in some capacity. Rhode Island has already offered some other rebate programs to residents directly from our state energy office. We have like a Drive EV rebate program where people are able to upload their income documents to verify that to qualify for additional incentives. So we've tried that out with some programs already and have had some success. So I think we're going to hope to build off of that to allow for those that are not in LIHEAP or WAP, and served by the CAPS, but may otherwise qualify for the HEEHR program, to be able to give us their documents up front and still be able to access these programs and the specific equipment that we're going to look to incentivize. Like Texas and like Eddie said, I think we're looking to steer clear of self-attestation. I don't think that really offers any advantages and would open a can of worms as far as then needing to verify on the back end everything. So I think we're going to steer clear of that and try to get any type of income verification to happen upfront or through categorical eligibility. So that's kind of our thought on that. And again, once we switch over to the HEEHR program, that one's a little less defined at this point, but like a lot of states, we're trying to figure out the best way to, as much as possible, I think, target that program to low-income households and maybe public housing and different things like that as much as possible. But obviously, as we've all discussed today, there may be a need to have that open to residents of all incomes of some sort. So we'll need to navigate that when the time comes. But that's my initial approach and thought on the income verification piece. And, I'll do the best I can to help answer any questions, but definitely interested in people's thoughts here.
I will do my best to help facilitate via the chat and people who want to raise their hands to contribute. So does anyone, it could be states or affiliates that want to share how they're currently thinking about it. I guess that'd be a question for the states, how you're thinking about currently conducting income verification. And for the affiliates that are on the line, if you can share a little bit about how you do income verification with your existing programs. And I am not afraid to call on people. Dylan, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Dylan Cry, here on behalf of the Wisconsin State Energy Office. I just wanted to add a note on self-attestation. So we too have pretty much ruled that out in most cases. There's just a lot there that we'd have to do. I will say that one narrow band that we're considering is emergency replacement for HVAC and heat pump water heaters through here. We would still want to check the income on the back end, but to allow that customer to move forward when they encounter that emergency scenario, they could tell us that they're either, categorically eligible, attest, right, that they are categorically eligible or under the income, and then we would follow up with them, in the days after. And along with that, there would be some kind of harsh language, right, to discourage them from lying to us, but that could be one to consider. That has to be approved by our Public Service Commission, I think either way, but one scenario in which a narrow band, again, of self-attestation that may benefit some residents. Stuff like homes, that's all a process, right? It takes a while. There's really no benefit to getting that kind of immediate income qualification for those homes. So I don't know that self-attestation is useful in that case, but just thought I'd share.
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario where it might be valuable to have some self-attestation if you're in a pinch time-wise. There's another question about self-attestation in the chat. Christina from Oregon is mentioning that DOE is requiring states to have a system in place to recoup rebate dollars if self-attestation is incorrect. And so the question she's posing to the group is, for anyone considering self-attestation, how are you addressing that requirement? And if anyone wants to chime in, I promise we won't hold you to the self-attestation. No takers? What I'm learning this afternoon is that there's a lot of requirements to these programs that are new to me. I did not know that DOE is requiring to recoup some of the dollars if the self-attestation is incorrect.
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't know that that is a requirement that's specifically in the guidance, but our federal grants officer has been in contact with DOE because this has been an issue that we wanted to get an answer on. And the answer that they provided, maybe they included an FAQ, I'm not sure, but the answer that they provided is that, we have to recoup those dollars if I think we asked what the error rate, what the allowable error rate was, and they said 0. So yeah, that's where we are at this point.
If I can ask you a follow-up, were you guys considering self-attestation, and have any of these requirements put you off?
I think we have been considering self-attestation because we've heard from our stakeholders that that it is useful for other programs and it has been helpful in those cases. So we've been really trying to be able to do self-attestation, but this issue of what to do if someone fraudulently submits their because we don't have a source of money to pay for that, so that's been kind of the sticking point for us at this point. There are probably other sticking points that we haven't gotten to yet, but this has been the one that's really tripped us up so far.
Yeah, and Marty is raising a good point in the chat, which is similar to self-attestation. How could a state enforce renter protections? Which I'm assuming for most of you is not something that is in your scope. Are there any implementers on the line that offer self-attestation to folks and want to chime in on how they do it? This is your chance to maybe convince people. Looks like, just taking a look at the chat here, it looks like Hawaii is going to allow self-attestation, and that they have a plan to recoup based on what is in state law. They would also propose going after the contractors to the extent that they are involved in the application process. And then that said, that they would intend to do it as quickly as possible to minimize potential issues. And then it looks like Illinois Solar for All does do self-attestation. So Elena, do you want to share how you handle it? Oh, she can't go off mute at the moment, but you'll put in a link for folks to consider. Claudia or anyone from Hawaii, can you share what led you to the decision to allow for self-attestation?
So we felt that it was important, trying to be as inclusive as possible, but it was not without consternation. So I would say that while we agreed to do it, we're doing so with a certain amount of trepidation. So that's why I said it's one of those things that we'll look at very closely, and we've written language into our application, explaining how we'll go about it. And there again, we're hoping that by limiting it, not necessarily in scope, but in practice, by able to verify those incomes as quickly as possible in the event self-attestation is used, we would kind of target that and highlight that and probably expedite that on our end, just to make sure that we're minimizing any potential issues. So we're not going after somebody months after the fact, after something's already been installed. It would be within a day or two, ideally, because we're still a relatively small state. So to go after that quickly before any real work had been done or money had exchanged hands. So we'll see how it goes in practice, but that's our intent.
So am I understanding the design correctly, that it like self-attestation would kind of be like initial like onboarding point of view, but before, maybe even before an assessment, or maybe in conjunction with the assessment, the income?
And I would say this is for the HEEHR program. So I'm not necessarily going as far as the HOMES program right now. We've not completed our application for that, but for the HEEHR program, and particularly, we're looking at kind of a rapid rollout phase. So, we're looking to be able to get people engaged and involved quickly, but for the HEEHR program specifically, we are allowing self-attestation. Whether or not we would do so for HOMES is a completely different question that we haven't broached yet.
Great. Thank you. And Bettina has a question in the chat about what we can learn from weatherization about enforcing renter protections. Any state that manages weatherization is welcome to, speak up and share their thoughts. And I'm also happy to regroup with those folks and see if they're able to put together some content for everybody about what they know and what they've learned.
And Maddie, this is it again. In question 93 of the FAQs talks about self-tested income verification. And the question was, is there an acceptable margin of error in the amount of reported income? And the answer was no. And all that means is that's just additional risk for us and additional risk for our administrator. And those are dollars that can be pointed towards more useful, because there is no allowance for any margin of error. That just means stay away from it from our point of view, because the cost to make sure that you stayed within a margin of error of 0 is infinitely high compared to the other services we could help for other beneficiaries.
Yes, it would seem that FAQ posed a lot of follow-up questions for me as well, because I was like, oh gosh, could I even tell you the exact dollar amount of my salary? I'm not sure if I could. But it sounds like Hawaii's approach, it would be tracked down before anything was attempted to be done. So that's interesting. Any other states want to share their considerations about self-attestation, or like their preferred approach to income verification in general? I think that question about having no margin of error brought up a lot of concerns for state energy offices who might have been originally planning on doing something like, hey, just tell us what income bracket you fall in and we can take it from there. But because there's not allowed to be any kind of margin of error, that really sort of disallows any kind of like self-selection into the categories where you might be able to get these rebates. Any other thoughts from folks on the line? people must have.
Yeah,
concerns.
man, the other thing for us is, this program goes through 2031. So if an individual is not selected in the first year because you're spreading your funds over the 5-year period, and then they have to try, if they're not selected for whatever reason, and they use the self-attestation as their income verification method, that's just all. Every year they'd have to reapply and resubmit their self-attested income, and again, that's just, you have to audit everything every time, and to verify that before you go a step further, it just seems like a real costly process.
Yeah. And Steve, can I ask you a follow-up question? If you know off the top of your head, you mentioned, being interested in replicating what is currently being done in your EV rebate program. Do you recall what kind of documentation is required for folks to participate in that rebate program, that sort of like upload process that you mentioned?
Yeah, I unfortunately I can't remember that right off, but I know, tying that into what seems to be allowable in the guidance for these home energy rebate programs is, we would be looking for, actual income documents, be that 1040, W-2, or like a month's worth of pay stubs. We would be expecting, I think, one of those to check the box to verify your income.
And do you know, sorry for the TICA question, so how it works on the back end? Like, what are you checking that against? For anything?
Great question. Yeah, I'm not sure I know how to answer that right off.
That is totally fine. That works.
Hey, Maddie, this is Dylan again from Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin, we've got Focus on Energy. It's our statewide energy efficiency program, been around for a very long time, 20 plus years. Our implementer, we do have income qualified rebates. These are self-imposed. We don't have any kind of state requirements as to how we go about checking, but we are able to claim more energy savings because of a lower baseline for these measures. And so we're saying, if we offer these, we will check to verify the income for these folks. It is a manual process, though, what we've been doing currently, and it's customer has to submit some form of, justification. Typically, it's pay stubs, all the things we've been talking about. We have done categorical eligibility as well, where they can submit their, their letter saying that they're in, X, Y, and Z program, food stamps, whatever, SNAP, whatever it is. So that is the process we've been pursuing. One thing we are looking at for the home energy rebate programs is to try to tie into some organizations that already have a database of some of those categorical eligibility. So for instance, in Wisconsin, there's a nonprofit that does some of the income qualification for the weatherization programs. And so we've been talking with them. They're tied into not all of, but some of the programs that, and I'm blanking on which ones, but like they can see if someone's eligible for like LIHEAP and I think some of maybe the medical stuff like Medicaid or Medicare. So instead of asking the customer to provide that, we're going to ask them, tell us if you're eligible for one of these categories. If they choose one of those, like Medicaid, for example, we're hopefully going to have a system where we can then ping that nonprofit and say, can you check to make sure this person's on that list? And if they are, they'll send it back to us and say, yes, that's great. So trying to make that process simple. All the rest of them that we don't have some direct database access for, we can still just ask that they upload the documents like we have been. So
yeah.
Trying to clean it up and make it easy, but it's tough because a lot of the state agencies, it took this nonprofit years to get access to some of these. So it's not like every state agency is just going to turn around and say, yeah, you can see who's in our database for Medicaid and all these programs, right? So it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to build off of just that last point there is even for us as the state energy office, getting categorical eligibility from other state energy offices is not simple, at least for us. Like that's going to require us to have MOUs in place and work out all the details with our other state departments if we are having any categorical eligibility of programs that another agency administers. So that in itself is a lift to sort that out, but something we're going to have to cross to get these programs off the ground.
And those MOUs are going to be super speedy, right?
Yeah. As fast as state government.
Yeah. A question I have for you and for Eddie both is, are either of you considering trying to expand the categorical eligibility list with any state-run programs?
Probably not. I think just because this is such a massive list, we're not going to be real innovative. We're going to probably lean towards a path of least resistance, knowing that if we expand beyond that, we've got to get DOE approval for every little expansion. And since we're not going to be one of the early applicants, that's going to really delay, potentially launching the program. And not, we're going to want to move. So we'll probably lean towards the approved pathways the DOE, provided in their documentation, and just stick to that.
I would second that in Rhode Island. I don't think I'm looking to explore anything, bringing in anything else for additional approvals. Again, thinking about the HEEHR program itself and our primary delivery mechanism for that, I was hoping that we're able to just kind of expand program offerings to people already in weatherization assistance and LIHEAP, and be able to make additional upgrades to their homes as a result of this through the CAP agencies. So hoping that that's the primary delivery mechanism, but then still keeping the door open for people that might be more of the moderate income households or whatever it may be, or for whatever reason not a part of those programs, to bring their paperwork to us and still be able to get rebates from this program.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Alyssa, I see you've got there's a little bit of a conversation going on in the chat about IVES, which some of you might be familiar with as a service that can be used to basically ping the IRS to reveal someone's income. And this was sort of like initially touted as an option for state energy offices. It was not the easiest thing. It would take some time. It's not free. But I did want to flag that I don't think this is an option anymore. And that looks like Dylan in Wisconsin agrees, because IVES recently changed their protocols so that program administration isn't an allowable use of IVES anymore. So I know that DOE is aware of this and that they are looking for ways to respond and find another universal option for states to use if they wanted to check income in that way. But Dylan or Alyssa, if you wanted to chime in, feel free.
Yeah, I was pushing for pursuing that when I first read it. I thought, this is great, right? We don't have to ask people for their income. And then I guess the IRS changed it, and only mortgage companies or someone, right, can access. So
yes, yeah. So unfortunately, Alyssa mentions that there is an other category that I'm sure you all could try if you wanted to for use of IVES. But yeah, it's been changed recently. And so hopefully it's on the long to-do list of DOE's publications to update that and let folks know that this is not a straightforward pathway anymore. And for folks that are interested, Elena did provide in the chat information about how they do income verification for the Illinois Solar for All program. There's some links if anybody wants to check that out. I'll turn things over to Eddie and Steve to see if they've got any lingering questions, or if you feeling compelled to wrap it up. Any final thoughts?
Well, for us, it's just, I agree with what Steve said. We're going to utilize community action groups for the hard to reach areas, and highly recommend that once the system gets set up, we work, the program administrator trains community action groups and how to implement it so that enrollment in those hard to reach areas can be successful. Because we're concerned, we've got a lot of rural areas like most states do, and we get a lot of emails from them, you know, how are you all going to help us and that type of thing. And not only that it's sparsely populated, that it's just they're concerned that they're going to get left out, and understandably so. So we'll be focusing. We'll be having a lot of efforts, you know, to try to make sure that the administrator does work with those community action groups, and that way we can reach those areas.
Any final thoughts from Rhode Island?
Well, we certainly have plenty of questions, for sure. Still trying to sort through all of this and how to get an application across the finish line. But nothing specific beyond what I've already shared, especially on the income verification question. But if any states are ever interested in connecting and trying to talk through any of those questions, I'm happy to find some time to connect with any states.
Excellent, thanks. Well, thank you both, and thank you to everybody who presented today. I'm just going to wrap things up by mentioning the plan for the call that's tomorrow. Tomorrow will be focused the afternoon on market transformation. And I'm sure you're all aware that market transformation plans are not due anytime soon. But I thought it was an important conversation to have, because what you choose as your market transformation goal will influence a lot of your program design decisions. And so tomorrow we'll have expert speakers lined up to talk about the different options that are proposed to state energy offices for market transformation opportunities, to basically talk them through and offer up why it might be worth prioritizing any of those topic areas. And then we'll end the day with, you know, if you want to execute on one of these market transformation plan ideas, here's how to build it into your program design plan. So that is the outline for tomorrow, and I hope that all of you will join us when we begin. We'll have a keynote speaker talking about the value of energy efficiency data at the mortgage portfolio level, which I think will be really interesting in the context of market transformation. So with that, I will say thank you to everybody for participating and engaging in the call this afternoon. I hope to see you all tomorrow. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. In the meantime, have a great afternoon, everybody.